Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Bridget walked leisurely down the long hospital corridor, adjusting the white kerchief that was riding on her side. Her footsteps echoed in the morning silence, broken only by the occasional cough from the wards and the muffled voices of the nurses on duty. She'd been working as a nurse in the ward for the critically ill at Volga Secondary Hospital for 15 years, ever since she'd divorced her deadbeat husband. Bridget remembered well the unfortunate day she'd found Ethan with another bottle of beer on the couch, surrounded by his equally worthless friends. Patience had run out. She had kicked her husband out the door, leaving her alone with two daughters in her arms, Cassandra, the older, and Amanda, a toddler. Since then, Bridget pulled the whole house on himself, worked around the clock, not shying away from the dirtiest work, just to feed herself and her daughters. It was useless to get child support out of her ex-boyfriend. Ujno very cleverly but politely he presented then a certificate of disability, then a fake paper on meager earnings, and she couldn't help herself and didn't have enough to ask from this rascal they would manage on their own. The work of an orderly was exhausting, but in general Bridget was even grateful to fate. The staff was good, the doctors and nurses respected her, and she knew how to get along with the patients. So today she rushed to the ward early in the morning. She had to prepare the newcomer in the ward, Julia, a young but very heavy patient. She had been brought in last week, her face haggard, her eyes sunken in, her skin gray. It was obvious that she had not long to live. But for some reason, Bridget felt warmth and compassion for her. Maybe it was because Julia was a little older than Cassandra. Or maybe it was because she held herself with dignity, never complaining, even though she tossed about in the heat of the night. The doctors had been very hesitant to operate on her in such a state, but it was pure madness. There was little chance of survival. Only Sylvester, a young experimental surgeon, took on such cases. But he, as luck would have it, was away on holiday in a neighboring state, and time was running out. Bridget sighed and grasped the doorknob with determination. She would get Julia back on her feet, and then Sylvester would be back. She couldn't give up without a fight. The room was stuffy, smelling of medicine. Julia lay with her eyes closed. Only her ragged breathing told her she was still alive. Bridget tiptoed over to the bed and adjusted the pillow. "Julia, sweetheart. It's time to get up. Rounds are coming up. I need to wash and tidy up." The patient slowly opened her cloudy blue eyes and smiled weakly. "Bridget, thank you. But what's all this for? I feel like I'm not going to make it. Why don't you just let me go in peace?" Tears came to her throat, but the nurse raised her eyebrows sternly. "What are you talking about? We can't give up. Do you hear me? Let's fight. Come on, sit down slowly. I'm going to wipe you." With infinite tenderness and care, Bridget wiped Julia's bloodless face with a damp cloth, helped her change into a clean shirt, brushed her blonde hair and braided it. "That's better. They'll bring a nice breakfast, and then the doctors will come. You just hang in there, okay, Julia?" She stroked the nurse's rough hand again in gratitude and closed her eyes. She was so tired, and Bridget wanted to howl with despair and helplessness. Oh, if only it hadn't been for Sylvester's bloody holiday. I'm sure he'd have worked something out, got Julia back on her feet. Now, what can they do? With a heavy heart, Bridget left the room and leaned against the wall, tears welling up in her eyes. How many of Julia's kind had she seen over the years? Young, beautiful, full of plans for life. And in the end, just a gravestone with dates of birth and death. "Bridget, what's the matter?" Judy, the nurse, asked me sympathetically. "It's a shame about Julia. She's so young. She has almost no chance. And if only our miracle worker were here now." "Yes," sighed Judy. "It's a disaster, but it's still a lot of work. Come on, your patient in Ward 5 has thrown up again." Bridget, wiping away her tears and shaking her head, followed the nurse down the corridors of the hospital. What was the use of killing herself? She had to work. Maybe there would be a miracle for Julia. The atmosphere on the ward was tense. Mr. Hubert, the head of the department, was pacing around his office, glancing at the telephone. For a week now he had been waiting for news from Sylvester, the only one who could save the wife of the wealthy businessman Lester. But the man had disappeared into thin air. He'd gone on holiday, switched off his mobile phone. The days were counting down. Mr. Hubert smoked nervously. What kind of man is he? Always doing things his own way, never consulting anyone. How many times had I, the head of the surgical department, told him not to show off, to work like everyone else, and there would be fewer conflicts. But no, this upstart Sylvester is always on his own methodology, his own approach, and yet, most importantly, he can do miracles, perform operations that others have never dreamed of. Mr. Hubert was distracted from his bitter thoughts by a knock at the door. Lester's bewildered face appeared on the threshold. "Didn't you find your genius?" The businessman asked gloomily, sitting down in his chair. The manager hesitated. "Here's the thing. Sylvester is now out of range. He has gone to his relatives urgently, but we will throw all our forces. I promise to carry out the operation without his participation. Of course, the risk increases, but I will not allow any risk." Lester interrupted him firmly. "I don't want to experiment on Julia. I'd rather have it this way. Easier, less torture. Don't try too hard. Do you understand, Hubert?" Mr. Hubert looked at his visitor in amazement. "That's news to me. What is this? A rich man won't fight for his wife's life. Anybody in his place would be on his feet, pouring millions of dollars into helping his beloved. And this one doesn't even want to risk it." The superintendent squinted his eyes, looking intently into Lester's calm, indifferent face, as if the fate of his nearest and dearest was not in question. "'Tis strange. Oh, how strange. But who is he to pry into another man's family?" "You can't force a man," Mr. Hubert said dryly, rising. "Well, that's your right. We'll continue with Julia's standard treatment. God willing." Lester nodded briefly and went out without even saying goodbye. And the superintendent sat for a long time, drumming his fingers on his desk. He did not like the whole story. Oh, he didn't like it. In the meantime, things were going on in the ward. Julia was writhing in pain, gasping, seething. Bridget rushed around, changing compresses and injecting painkillers, but it didn't get any better. "Bridget, honey," she whispered, grabbing the nurse's hand. "Don't. Let me go. It's the end soon anyway. At least this way I won't have to suffer." Bridget's heart was bleeding at these words. How could it be? Why did everyone give up? And her husband seems to be resigned to it. There really is still a chance. She could hear the nurses whispering that if Sylvester hadn't gone on holiday, he could have saved Julia. And then Bridget was struck by a thunderclap. What if I tried to find him myself? But not just sit idly by and watch Julia fade away. We must act now. With her mind made up, she whirled into the residence room. Judy said Sylvester had relatives in a neighboring state. In Berrysville, I think, Bridget said firmly. That's right, she was the one who took the parcel to the post office. When he'd asked her to drop by to send a present to her mother, that was where she should go. Bridget went to the superintendent. "Mr. Hubert, I need a day off for a family emergency. I really need it. I can't do it." The superintendent wrinkled his nose in displeasure, but waved his hand. "Go anyway, you're of little use now. You're not yourself." And Bridget, feeling her heart pounding with fear and hope, ran out of the hospital. Just in time to find Sylvester, to ask him to come back, to save Julia. And then whatever happens. If only I didn't feel guilty about not doing all I could. Mr. Hubert drummed his fingers nervously on the table, listening to the ringing of the receiver. Come on, pick up the phone, don't procrastinate. You know I'll call." "You told me to let you know right away," Mr. Hubert said when he finally heard a click on the other end of the line. It was Lester's husky voice. "Hello, Mr. Hubert." "Mr. Lester, I'm calling about your wife," the superintendent said frantically. There was a tense silence at the other end. Then Lester said softly, "Is Julia worse?" How so? Mr. Hubert was mentally indignant. He asked her to take it easy, and now he's pretending to be a loving husband. Aloud, however, he said, choosing his words carefully. You see, Mr. Lester, the dynamics are not good. Not good at all, frankly. I'm afraid our efforts may not be enough. Lester was silent for a moment, hummed, then stretched out thoughtfully. I thought I told you not to disturb the natural course of things. Let it go as it goes. Do you understand me, Mr. Hubert? What a sly beast, thought the superintendent through gritted teeth. All innuendo and innuendo and innuendo. A worthy reward for a special approach. Oof, Mr. Lester. I understand you perfectly well, he began patiently. But you must come to my aid, because this is a difficult case. I mean, if you don't do anything about it. Do I mind? Lester interrupted. There was a note of steel in his voice. You act, Mr. Hubert, as circumstances dictate. But don't try too hard, I beg of you. Certainly no conciliums or luminaries from the capital, it's no use. You know that. It's just a lot of pain for Julia. Mr. Hubert bit his lip. Good for him, Lester, to reason. It's not his head in the noose if anything happens. But for him, Hubert, there's no getting out of it. It's good if he's sacked rather than locked up, but he can't refuse. And they're promised. A new flat. A new car. It's not a pound of sultanas. I see your point, said Mr. Hubert, muffled at last. We'll act according to circumstances, said Mr. Hubert. But do you realize, Mr. Hubert, what if there's a committee or an inspection? Don't worry, Mr. Hubert, said Lester, almost affectionately. Do your work in peace. But you can be sure of my gratitude. I always keep my word. Well, look, sighed the head of the department. I hope for you. And you're doing the right thing. Lester grinned. All right, keep the treatment going, but don't overdo it. You understand me? And don't forget about your Sylvester. You know what I mean? Yes, I do, Mr. Hubert confirmed doomily. Everything will be done. Good. Keep me posted then. The receiver buzzed. Mr. Hubert slowly put down the receiver, wiped his forehead. That's the way it is. It's too late to backtrack. He twisted around in his chair mindlessly, walked over to the window, and lit a cigarette, taking a deep drag. No, that's right. Sylvester better not come back now. He's a fucking idealist. He'll get involved, start saving the day. No, let him stay on his holiday. Mr. Hubert put out his cigarette butt with relish and opened the window with determination. It's all right, we'll get through it. It's a big risk, of course, but it's a big score. Is it the first time? It's painful at heart, but there's no way to retreat. Now it's win or lose, he mentally corrected himself. It's definitely doom and gloom. He picked up the telephone receiver, started dialing the number of the resident's room. Give the order, confirm the order to Sylvester. Well, Sylvester will rest and gain strength, and will manage without him. Everything is for the best, the head of the department decided to himself. The train rattled its wheels, taking Bridget away from the city, away from the hospital where her Julia was slowly fading away. Away toward the unknown, but also toward the tiny ghostly hope of a miracle. God help me, the nurse whispered frantically, shrinking into a ball. In her hands, Bridget held a slip of paper with an address on it. Let me succeed. Let him listen to me. Yesterday's events overturned the heart with expectation. Outside the window, the shambling cottages, the sparse abandoned platforms whizzed by. Bridget counted the stations to Birchwood. Again and again, she ran her plan through her mind. She would find the doctor, and he would come back. He would come back, he wouldn't, because a human life was at stake. Sylvester rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly and slammed the medical records shut. It was no use. For the second week, he had been traveling around the region in search of a specialist who could help his son Martin. But all to no avail, neither psychologists nor neurologists, and even the praised professors from the capital did not take up the challenge. Martin's case was too complicated. 2 years had passed since Linda's death, 2 years of pain and helplessness. Sylvester still couldn't come to terms with the loss of his beloved wife, but he held on for the sake of his son. But Martin, it was as if overnight he turned from a cheerful and agile boy into a pale shadow. He shut down, stopped talking. And then he collapsed, his legs gave out, and he lost his appetite. Doctors only spread their hands, no physical reasons for paralysis did not find. Everything was in his head, in his soul, in the torment of a grieving child's soul, which Sylvester did not know how to heal. A trip to the regional center was the last hope. But even there it was silent. The luminary only shook his head, looking at analyses and scans, and politely advised to go to psychiatrists. In a word, a dead end. From bitter reflection, Sylvester was distracted by a knock at the door. Who the devils had brought in? He opened the door, and there, nervously clutching his purse, stood Bridget, the very nurse from his ward who had nursed the most hopeless. The one that even Jill, the head nurse, was afraid of. "Sylvester," she blurted out, barely catching her breath. "Oh, I'm glad I found you. I found out where you are from your mum. It's such a thing. Julia's not very good, remember, and without you, no one will do it." Sylvester felt a twinge in his heart. Julia, beautiful Julia. He'd insisted on the operation when she was first brought in, but he'd been afraid to take any chances with the department. He kept dragging it out. And now he's at the end of his rope. And the main thing is they kept it from him, the bastards. They don't want him to be a hero again. As if he needs it. "Does Mr. Hubert know you're here to see me?" Sylvester asked glumly, looking at Bridget. She shook her head that he would never allow it. She had come herself. "Well, I've run away. Sylvester, you must come back and save Julia. She's young and wanted a baby," she said, her voice trembling and tears glistening in her eyes. And Sylvester suddenly realized with all clarity that he must go. Never mind the leave. Never mind the intrigues of the superintendent. To hell with everything. He was a doctor, and his duty was to save lives. He can't do anything about Martin yet. Mum will look after him, wouldn't be the first time. "She will, Bridget," he said firmly, buttoning up his suitcase. "I'll tell you what, you and I will be right back. I'll just drop in on your mother and warn her." Bridget glowed and almost kissed his feet. "Thank you, darling. Thank you. Thank you. I knew you wouldn't refuse, with such a heart." Sylvester just waved it off. Personal dramas are personal dramas, but work is work. And yet Mr. Hubert couldn't call, could he? Was it pride, or was he afraid that Sylvester's stardom would overshadow his own? It was Birchwood. It flew by in one breath. Sylvester drove the car as fast as he could, just in time to explain to his mother, to ask her to keep an eye on his son for a few days, and to rush back to Julia at the hospital. Nothing could stop him now, neither the intrigues of his superiors nor anyone's disbelief. Only forward, racing against death. Bridget sat beside him, gripping the doorknob, silent, only occasionally sighing convulsively. She was going through hardship. It's not easy for her, either. So many years as a nurse, and still cannot get used to the grief. She cares for every patient. And Sylvester suddenly caught himself thinking that he was glad of her presence. Even in this mad race, he did not want to stay alone. She was an island of hope and warmth. They stopped at his mother's house. Sylvester flew up to the 3rd floor, jumping over the steps. "Mum, I'm going into town to work. I've got an emergency, an operation. You're with Martin for now, okay? For 3 days, no more." The mother only sighed, nodded habitually once. "I'll look after him here." The son rushed into the room, pressed his cheek against the top of his son's head for a moment. "Martin, I'll be right back. Will you stay with your grandmother for a while?" "All right, and I'll bring you a present, a new book." The son didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't even look at his father. Sylvester, gritting his teeth, turned away. Nothing. They would fight. He would find a way to get through to his son. Right now he had to save someone else's life, because he was a doctor, and that's what he should do. The journey back seemed endless. Sylvester glanced at his watch every now and then, wondering how long it would take to get to town, how long Julia would last. Bridget stood motionless, afraid to breathe, as if the slightest movement or word might upset the delicate balance of their plan. When the lights of the hospital appeared ahead, the sky was already dark. Sylvester pulled up at the checkpoint and jumped out of the car. "Bridget," I'm going upstairs to talk to Mr. Hubert first. God willing, we'll manage." He squeezed the nurse's fragile shoulder, desperately believing that he could do it. He couldn't help it, because he was the only one who could. Everyone was waiting for him: Julia, his tormented relatives, and this sweet, kind woman who had been so lazy to find him in another city and pull him out of the swamp of grief and despair. "Hang in there," said Bridget Sylvester. The surgeon took a determined step towards the doors of the hospital. Fight and search, find and don't give up, just like in children's books. That was his motto and his path. And let the whole world wait, he would save. After all, that's what he was called to do. Bridget ran into the hospital, tying her dressing gown as she went. After a sleepless night and the mad race from Berezovsky back, she felt utterly shattered, but there was no giving up. Not now that there was a glimmer of hope. There was a strange, ominous silence in the corridors. Bridget stood still for a moment, listening, and then she heard an indistinct noise coming from outside Julia's room. Her heart jumped alarmingly. Was it? She rushed to the door, swung it open, and was stunned. Lester, pale and resolute, was trying to lift his wife's lifeless body from the bed. Nearby stood a gurney, already prepared for the terrible journey. "Lester, are you out of your mind?" Bridget screamed, rushing to her side. "Where are you taking her?" "To the morgue," he said, muffled, not looking at the nurse. "It's all over. You can see she's barely breathing. I told the doctor she only had 5 minutes to live." Bridget felt nausea coming up her throat. "What on earth is going on?" she said firmly. "This is what you call a loving husband, for God's sake. I won't let him in." She blocked Lester's way. "Sylvester will be here any minute. He'll save her. He promised." A strange expression flashed in Lester's eyes, one of irritation or fear. He jerked, tried to get round Bridget, but Bridget was dead. "Are you out of your mind?" he hissed, grabbing the nurse by the shoulders. "Get out of the way. It's getting late. Don't you see? Julia is my..." He hesitated. And Bridget suddenly thought with horror that he probably couldn't even say it. Dead. He doesn't believe it. He doesn't want to believe it. And that's why he's rushing to the morgue, to get rid of this terrible, unbearable pain. "Lester," she said affectionately, looking into his face. "Sweetheart, but bear with me a little longer. I told you Sylvester would be here any minute. He'll help her," said Bridget. "You'll see." Lester bit his lip, averted his eyes, and his fingers clenched the edge of the sheet, white with tension. "What will he do?" he said faintly. "We've tried everything. It's no use." Bridget felt despair and hopelessness in Lester's voice. Had it cut her to the heart. She involuntarily reached out and touched his white knuckles in a faint attempt to comfort him. And suddenly she froze here. On Lester's wrist was the faintest whitening of an old scar, a thin, flat, jagged scar, the mark of a deep cut. Bridget stared at the scar as if mesmerized, feeling something strange and disturbing rise up inside her. It was as if she'd seen the dusty yard of the orphanage, a skinny, black-haired boy waving a shard of glass in front of her. "Well, Litterbug, are you going to denounce me? Let me tell you that I broke your pencil." Screaming, crying, burgundy drops on the gray asphalt. The scar, narrow and jagged, a lasting reminder of the day when little Bridget dared to fight back against the orphanage's biggest bully. "Lester," she breathed out through her lips, her eyes fixed on Lester. "You?" Lester flinched, recoiled. Recognition and confusion flashed in his eyes. "Bridget," he muttered, pulling his sleeve down frantically. "You're here, Bridget." He squared his shoulders. She was not afraid now of this sudden past, nor of the impossible future. "The important thing now is Julia," Bridget said, looking at Lester seriously. For some reason he jerked as if slapped, took a step back. Anger, resentment, and confusion struggled in his face. Abruptly turning round, he walked out angrily, slamming the door. And Bridget sank powerlessly to the edge of Julia's bed. Jesus, Lester Black. How could this have happened? It's been so many years, and nothing has changed. He's still the same bore, the same bully, only with a more expensive suit, and still as ready to walk through lives and destinies without noticing anything around him. Bridget took Julia's hand again, gazing into her bloodless face. The native was breathing faintly, nervously, but breathing. It was not for nothing that she had sent Lester away then. Not for nothing. Now the main thing was to hold out until Sylvester came. Then everything would be all right. The nurse looked at the door. I wish to God their savior angel would come, Bridget thought. No, Julia hasn't got time, not anymore. And Bridget's own strength is running out too. The only hope is whether they'll make it. She covered the frail, almost weightless hand of the dying woman with her palm. She murmured to herself, without noticing, the ancient, half-forgotten words of the prayer her mother had taught her as a child for peace, for mercy, for a mercy, for a miracle. And it wasn't over yet. It was too soon to give up. As long as she was here, and as long as Julia was breathing, Bridget would fight for her and for her right to live, even if it means coming face to face with the ghosts of the past. As Bridget finished her desperate plea, the door of the room burst open with a clatter, and Sylvester stood on the threshold, breathing heavily, disheveled, in a hastily thrown-on dressing gown. "Where is the sick woman?" he said curtly, glancing round the room. Bridget jumped up, rushing towards him. "Sylvester, thank God you're here. Julia's not well at all. Her husband was about to take her to the morgue, and I had to fight him off." The surgeon's face darkened. He resolutely stepped to the bed, bent over Julia, felt the pulse, lifted the eyelids, looked into the pupils and made a verdict. "Still alive, but on the verge. Prep the OR. Immediately. Let's fight it out." Bridget, unable to feel her feet under her from relief and joy, rushed to carry out the instructions. Finally, everything was going to be all right. Sylvester is a magician. He can bring anyone back from the dead. The next few hours merged for Bridget into one endless, agonizing moment. The operating theater, the harsh light of the lamps, the creaking of surgical instruments. Sylvester, collected and determined, bent over Julia's prostrate body. His hands fluttered like wings. Confident, swift, unmistakable. And then there was the ICU room, the beeping of instruments, the long hours of waiting, and finally the joyous, turning over everything inside news. He'll live. The crisis had passed. Bridget ran out into the corridor and ran nose to nose with Mr. Hubert, the ward manager. He looked at her as if she were a ghost, grim and perplexed. "What are you doing here?" He gritted his teeth. "What the hell are you doing here? I thought you were home on a family emergency. You called Sylvester here." Bridget lifted her chin and looked Mr. Hubert straight in the eye. "I did," she said firmly. "What was there to do? You were the one who refused to save Julia. I couldn't just watch her die." The superintendent's face contorted into a grimace of anger. He stepped forward, pointing a finger at Bridget, trembling with rage. "How dare you, you bitch? Who let you? No, just think of it, a nurse telling the chief what to do. That's it. I've had enough. I want you to resign, and I don't want you here." Bridget gasped. She didn't see that coming. For what? For saving a life? A tired-looking Sylvester peered out of the emergency room door. "Mr. Hubert, wait. Why are you shouting? She did the right thing. If it hadn't been for Bridget, it would have been Julia all over again. She'll live now, I promise." But the superintendent just shrugged it off. "You keep your mouth shut. You're the one who put Bridget in trouble with your self-rule. You won't wait. I won't fire you. Such personnel are not on the road. And this one." He waved his head contemptuously in the direction of Bridget. "There's nothing more to do here. Goodbye, then." Mr. Hubert turned abruptly and strode off into his office, and Bridget was left standing in the middle of the corridor, devastated, crushed. So much for gratitude. So much for the happy ending. Sylvester touched her shoulder. Sylvester looked into her eyes. "Bridget, you mustn't kill yourself," he said. "Mr. Hubert's always been crazy, you know that. Don't worry about the job. He'll change his mind when he calms down. In the meantime, I'll help." Bridget smiled, nodded. "Yeah, well, Sylvester doesn't throw words around. But that didn't make it any easier. It hurt to the point of tears. Why would he do that? Meanwhile, Julia was slowly getting better. She still hadn't regained consciousness, but her vitals were steadily climbing. Sylvester, hands in his pockets, slimmed down, almost never left her bedside. And after each examination, after each check of the instruments, a shy but increasingly confident smile lit up his face. "She will recover," he said firmly. "She will definitely recover. Young, strong." A week later, when Bridget was completely exhausted without her favorite business, an unexpected visitor came to her house, Sylvester himself. "Bridget, help me out," he began. "Here's the thing. Remember I told you about my son? Martin? Of course you do." Bridget almost burst into tears, for she felt so sorry for the poor boy and his grief-stricken father. "Now," continued Sylvester, "I have a great favor to ask of you. Could you look after Martin for me? My mother is exhausted, and the boy needs special care now. I mean, you've done it all before, you know." Bridget took her breath away. Work. A favorite, familiar job. "Of course, Sylvester," she exclaimed fervently, clasping his hands. "Yes, I'd be glad to do it. And be sure I will raise your Martin. Would you like me to get my daughter involved? Cassandra is a teacher from God, trained as a defectologist." Sylvester glowed and kissed Bridget on both cheeks. She was embarrassed by the attention. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you. Now, Bridget, I owe you one. I owe you for life. Anything you want, you ask, I'll do anything for you." She just waved me off. "Oh, come on, what's the score? I'm not here for profit, I'm here out of the goodness of my heart." And the work began. Bridget and Cassandra literally moved into Sylvester's house. Getting Martin on board wasn't easy at first. The boy was withdrawn, unwilling to make contact. But kindness and affection work wonders. Not even a month later, Martin's eyes revealed a shy interest in life. He began to listen to what Cassandra was telling him. He reached for his pencils and colors, played with Amanda, Bridget's youngest daughter, whom she brought to Beechworth. And 2 months later, oh miracle, Martin himself asked to walk in the park with his feet with Amanda. When Sylvester took Martin home, he marveled. "Bridget, you're magic. How did you do it?" I was beginning to despair. Bridget smiled embarrassedly back. "What's it got to do with me? Love is the main doctor. Only love can heal souls." And soon another miracle happened at the city hospital. Julia woke up, opened her eyes, looked round the room with a cloudy look, barely moving her lips, and asked for a drink. Lester sat down in a chair and smoked, clenching the filter furiously with his teeth. Julia's pale, haggard face stood before his eyes. What a tenacious bitch, he thought. I had hoped that the disease itself would solve everything, relieve me of the burden in the form of my wife, with whom we have long been strangers. And now that wretched nurse has ruined everything. A few puffs, and he smoked again, smoldering like a steam engine. Well, she's going to dance. She'll know what a pound of flesh is. And at the same time, I'll teach that upstart surgeon Sylvester a lesson. He's a hero. He's always sniffing about, 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 sniffing about. Lester put out his cigarette and grinned. He'd have a handle on those snakes. He remembered the other day seeing Sylvester's son, a scowling boy, in the park with Bridget's daughter, a laughing red-haired girl the same age as Sylvester's boy, hovering near him. Well, he drummed his fingers on the table thoughtfully. There's an elderberry in the garden, and an uncle in the house. The anticipation of revenge was aflame. Now he knew how to hurt both Bridget and the surgeon. It was only necessary to think it over carefully, so that no mosquito could pinch his nose. Lester rose resolutely, headed for the door. "Hey Joyce," he said to his secretary. "I want you to find this Ray guy right away. You know, I saved him from jail once. I've got a delicate business to attend to," Lester said. The secretary nodded understandingly and clicked on the keys. And Lester, whistling, went out into the street. He felt 10 years younger. Now he was going to show them all who was boss, and Sylvester would have his tail between his legs. He's not going anywhere, but only if everything with his ex-boyfriend would be all right. Something for old debts will pay off, will help to teach this impudent couple a lesson by all rules. It's not the first time. Grinning, Lester got into the Lexus and gave the address. Well, now it's just a matter of tracing the moment and striking a blow that would be remembered for life. Hubert, stay out of my way. If you get in my way, it'll be bad, he hissed under his breath. The car sped off, carrying away the intrigue raging in grim triumph, and Bridget knew nothing of it. She was working at the hospital again. Human Resources called, asking her to come back. Sylvester was right. The head of the department had calmed down and reversed his decision. And no one would let the labor code be wavered. Absorbed in her worries, Bridget forgot all about Lester. His parting threats had faded from her memory. There was no time to worry, there was too much to worry about. Every morning she rushed to the hospital. There was barely enough time and strength to run home, to feed her eternally hungry children, to exchange a few affectionate words, and then to rush back at full speed. Weekends were also busy. To take Martin and Amanda to the park, or to the shop for groceries. This morning Bridget had made a quick sandwich for her daughter and had gone off to run errands. Cassandra volunteered to walk the children. Bridget was in a hurry to get to the hospital. "Julia," she said, adjusting her pillow. "It's all right. It's all right. We'll give you a shot and you'll feel better. And then Sylvester will be here. He'll get you back on your feet in no time," Bridget said. Julia smiled weakly in return. Over the weeks, she and Bridget had become friends, almost twins. Bridget did what she needed to do, tiptoed out of the room and glanced at the clock. "Oh, it's lunchtime soon. I should call and see how the kids are doing. I'll run round to the hospital nursery to pick up Amanda too. She and Martin are so close, aren't they?" Cassandra didn't answer right away. When Bridget finally heard her choked, broken voice, her heart was filled with foreboding. "Mummy," she said, choking back sobs. "Mummy, I don't know what to do. They're gone. Martin and Amanda. They're gone." Bridget's legs gave out. She sat down in her sister's chair, phone in hand. "Missing how?" she whispered. "I'm sorry," Cassandra began to sob. "What happened?" Choking on her tears, she rambled on about their walk in the park. Martin wanted ice cream. She'd gone to the kiosk for a minute, and when she returned, neither Martin nor Amanda were there. Bridget jumped up, dashed across the hospital, ran to Sylvester, who was on duty today. "What?" he roared, clutching his head. "Missing? Are you kidding me? How could you, Bridget?" he shouted. "I thought you..." He hesitated, seeing the state she was in, and waved his hand, saying, "We'll sort it out later. Now we must go at once to look for her." And so they were already rushing through the city, searching the back alleys and squares, asking passers-by, looking into all the crevices. But what happened? As if in water. In the third hour of their fruitless search, when despair and terror were at their throats, Bridget suddenly noticed some movement on the roadside. She looked closer. "Oh my God! It's Bill," she exclaimed. The local bum she'd taken out when he was dying of gangrene in the hospital. They saved his leg, but he was left with a limp. "Bill, honey." She ran to him. "Have you seen anybody here?" "My children, a girl and a boy." He stared at Bridget for a moment, but then he suddenly perked up and nodded. "I saw them," Bill mumbled. "I was surprised myself. Why are they without adults? They got into some guy's car and drove off." Sylvester's cheekbones twisted. "Did you get the license plate number?" "The make?" He rushed over to the tramp. He shook his head in fright. "I couldn't see much. It was dark. A rich car, yes. What's the license plate number?" "Well, numbers, letters. How can you remember?" Bridget woke up. She looked into the tramp's eyes and asked him nicely. "Bill, sweetheart, you remember? Anything at all? They couldn't have just disappeared into nothing." Bill thought about it, scratched the back of his head, and suddenly he said, "The numbers were in order. It's funny, 1, 2, 3, isn't it? And the letters were either K or X in front." Bridget almost jumped for joy. Thank goodness for a trace. Sylvester was about to run to the police. Let them look for him before it's too late. But then Bridget was struck by a thunderbolt. 1, 2, 3. Kylie FX somewhere recently she'd seen this number before. But where? And then it hit her. Lester's car, of course. A rich white car. Bridget felt a chill go through her. Really? No, it can't be. He wouldn't do that to children, would he? Why not? An inner voice asked snidely. With Julia, he'd do it. And with Martin, your Amanda would be fine. Bridget didn't hesitate to dash to the car. Do you know Sylvester's address? She threw over her shoulder. Call the hospital. God, I wish I'd made a mistake, Bridget thought, but before she knew it, Sylvester was speeding down the motorway. What's the horsepower of the old Renault? 150 kilometers an hour. 40 minutes later, they pulled up at the treacherous fence of Lester's mansion. Bridget swung open the gate without further ado, burst into the house, and immediately heard the familiar cry of a baby. She burst into the living room, burning with righteous anger. Lester jumped to meet her, knocking over a chair, but it was too late. In the corner, Bridget could already see Martin and Amanda, frightened, huddled together on the sofa, confused and crying. Oh, you. Bridget gasped, slowly stepping on her former mate. What are you doing? Have you gone mad? You're going to take it out on the children, and you don't remember yourself. She swung to slap Lester, but he suddenly intercepted her arm and slapped her behind her back. You shouldn't be messing around, he said through gritted teeth. I will. Bridget gasped with rage and broke free of his steel grip. You will answer for everything. Do you understand? For everything, and for Julia. And for this she nodded at a shaking Amanda. I'll drag you through the courts. I'll remember everything. Lester's eyes were filled with hatred. But then there was a sound behind her. Get your hands off me right now. Or am I not responsible for myself? Sylvester, flaming with anger, stepped towards them, making a fist. Lester looked at him, at the frightened children, gritted his teeth, and let go of Bridget, spat angrily. Take your puppies. And I don't want you out of here. You'll have a good time anyway, I promise you that. Shivering from the experience, Bridget picked up Amanda, who was bawling. Sylvester scooped Martin up and held him close. We'll never set foot here again, he said, glaring at Lester. But you stay away from us too. Bridget shook her head and held Amanda's sobbing face tighter to her. Her heart was torn with pity for the children and the fear she felt. But the most important thing now was to get them away from here, away from this nightmare. In the car, as Bridget struggled to catch her breath and keep her hands from shaking, Sylvester turned to her. Bridget, he said quietly and seriously, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I shouldn't have snapped at you, blamed you. If it hadn't been for your determination, your intuition, I dread to think what would have happened. Thank you. The words made Bridget's nose water. Wow. Sylvester, a proud surgeon, and suddenly he's apologizing. It must have been the shock of the experience. She nodded silently, unable to say a word. Now she had to get the kids home to safety and then get to the hospital and check on Julia. God, why do they have to go through this ordeal? As if they haven't suffered enough already, Bridget thought. The next few days became one endless cycle of worry and anxiety. Julia was slowly recovering and was eager to go home. She had to help her with the discharge paperwork and packing. At the same time, Bridget was flitting between work and home, checking to see if Amanda had calmed down. But her daughter was holding up well, just begging. Mum, let's take Martin to live with us. He's sad on his own. Dad's always at work. It's fun here, isn't it? Bridget sighed, stroking her head. The two of them had really hit it off. It would be a crime to separate them now. But would Sylvester let his son go? Especially after everything. But Sylvester surprised Bridget by arriving with a shy smile. Bridget, would you be so kind as to look after Martin, he asked. He's been very sad lately. I'm afraid I can't give him the attention he deserves. I'd take him to his mom, but he's so attached to you, especially Amanda. Well, why don't you let him stay with you if you don't mind? Bridget almost cried with emotion and gratitude. Don't worry about the money. I'll take care of everything, Sylvester added. What a man, he doesn't take care of himself. He works hard, and yet he worries about his son. And really could, as many, could have sent the boy to his grandmother. But he worries about the boy's mental comfort. Look at him. Bridget fervently assured him that she would look after Martin responsibly. Life was slowly getting back on track. Finally, the day came when Julia left the hospital, truly recovered. She gave Bridget a big hug goodbye. If it hadn't been for you, Julia began. But Bridget just waved her off. Come on, Sylvester's got you from the dead. He's our wizard. At the mention of Sylvester, Julia's eyes lowered in embarrassment, and Brigitte felt like she'd been scalded with boiling water. Good heavens. Julia was already hurrying to the waiting car. She looked back, waved, and shouted, I'll call you. You're my name's sister now. Don't think you're going to get away from me. Bridget smiled back. Wow, a sister. How it is in life. Not so long ago they were strangers, and now they've become so close. And yet I felt uneasy in my heart. Julia's cheeks flushed eloquently at the mention of Sylvester, and he began to visit the Lesters more and more often on various pretexts. He asked about their health, he checked their tests. Oh, Bridget, you fool, Valentina sighed to herself, trying her best to fight off the jealousy that had flared up. What is there to dream about? Julia is so beautiful. She's rich again. And you're just an ordinary nurse, even though you're in good standing. And you're not exactly a young woman. How can you compete with her? But no matter how much Bridget chastised herself, no matter how much she urged herself not to be jealous of other people's happiness, she felt a sharp, unbearable longing in her heart and wanted to howl with hopelessness. So Bridget went to work and housework. And then Bill showed up, the tramp who had seen the children. If it hadn't been for him, he'd come to the hospital one day, stomped round the door. He asked shyly, Bridget, do you have a job for me? Something to help me out, like scrubbing floors or carrying something heavier? I've been wasting away. Bridget gasped. Wow, Bill's asking for a job. He's going to be a man again. She couldn't pass up the opportunity. She got the tramp a job in the laundry, where there was always a shortage of hands. At the same time, Bridget began to ask him what was going on. Why had he come to this life? And Bill became brave, cheerful, and told her a marvelous story. It turned out he'd once been a decent man. He worked in a factory, built a house, loved his wife dearly. But then disaster struck. His wife ran away with her lover and took everything, all the savings. And the flat was registered to her. And Bill himself, with grief and despair, slowly went down. Bridget listened and only shook her head. Well, what passions and fears? You can't tell from Bill, though he's a hardened man, an old tramp. And he's had an open mind, too. Now she took the poor fellow seriously. She came, fed him, invited him to wash, sleep, and live at her house. See if the man would come to his senses. He wouldn't go to waste. Bill was transformed indeed. Bill squared his shoulders, even began to smile, not boldly, as if remembering what it was like. He followed Bridget's tail, looked into her mouth, called her savior. Julia sat in the kitchen, stirring her freshly brewed tea thoughtfully with a spoon. Sylvester sat opposite her with his arm resting on his head. He looked tired and a little anxious. I don't know where Lester has gone. Sylvester wrinkled his brow, sipping from his cup. It's been so long, and there's no sign of him. That's not good. Julia shrugged her shoulders. Oh, really? Oh, don't tell me. I've got my heart in a bad place. It seems that one day he'll turn up and start shouting for his rights. I'm his wife, his lawful wife, and I'm not going anywhere. Sylvester resolutely covered her palm with his, squeezed it a little. Don't worry, we won't let you offend. And he wouldn't dare after what he's done. Probably lurk time now waiting. It's for the best. Julia smiled weakly, looking at Sylvester gratefully. What a reliable, true friend he is. Who would have thought we'd be friends like this after all the trouble we've been through? And at first she didn't want to believe it when they told her that her husband was going to treat her like that. She was about to take a breath to thank Sylvester once more for his support when suddenly there came a sharp, shrill screech of brakes from the street. The next instant the front door swung open with a crash, and Lester burst into the kitchen, angry as hell. "Sit down, lovebirds," he said, glaring at them frantically. "Having a family tea?" Sylvester jumped up, covering the frightened Julia. "How did you get in here? What do you want?" he shouted. Lester laughed, an angry, hysterical laugh. "I actually live here, in case you didn't know. But you, mate, you don't want to eat another man's loaf, and get out of my way." He stepped forward, shoved Sylvester firmly with his shoulder, and rushed to the wall where the home safe was hidden in a niche. "Mine, the home safe," he muttered frantically, picking at the code lock. "Nothing, nothing, nothing. Now I'll take some money and hello home. You can go on making nice, I won't interfere." Sylvester tried to push Lester away, to grab him by the arms. But the man, furious and determined, threw Sylvester away as easily as a pesky fly. Julia shrieked, rushed to the door to call for help. But Lester, in some unfathomable way, had guessed her intentions, and in no time at all blocked her way. "Stop," he hissed. "Don't even think about it. I'm in command of the parade now." Sylvester tried again to interfere, to say something. But Lester waved it away without looking, and something glinted dimly in his hand. Julia recognized it as a knife. And the next instant Sylvester gasped and fell on his back. A flickering scarlet blot flashed and disappeared beneath his jacket. Julia screamed, rushed to him. Lester yanked her by the hair, pulling her to her feet. "What did I say? Don't move." "Calm down, you fool. Let me get the money and fuck you." But Julia could no longer hear. There was a nasty ringing in her ears, and everything was blurred before her eyes, and only Sylvester's pale face loomed, trembling and moving. She couldn't remember how she had grabbed the heavy cast-iron frying pan and smashed it over Lester's head with all her might. Lester's eyes bulged and he slowly sank to the ground. Julia, on shaky legs, rushed to the telephone, dialed the number of the ambulance, and baring her teeth, shouted, "Now. A man is dying." Then she called the police, and only then did she rush to Sylvester, trying with trembling hands to feel for a pulse. And then time went on at a frantic, unimaginable pace, stomping feet, slamming doors, scraps of phrases. The police arrived, the doctors. Julia was shouting and explaining, tears smearing down her cheeks. Lester, still not recovered, was hastily handcuffed and taken away. Meanwhile, the paramedics were loading and emotionless, bleeding Sylvester into the ambulance, fussing and running. Julia was sobbing, crumpling her hands over his and her own clothes. Someone was shaking her shoulder. Someone was asking her questions, but the words came out as if through cotton wool. Only one thought pounded in her head like hot metal, echoing in her temples. If only we could get there in time, if only we could save them. Bridget, pale and tense, rushed to the hospital 15 minutes after Sylvester had been admitted. She threw on a dressing gown and rushed to the operating theater. "Chest wound, massive blood loss," one of the surgeons said curtly. "Lung injury. We need a transfusion of at least a liter of blood and plasma," the surgeon explained to the nurses. Bridget nodded and rushed out of the operating theater. Julia, crumpling her nervous clothes with one hand and crumpling her tear-stained handkerchief in the other, sat outside the door. "Let's go," Bridget commanded firmly, taking her under the elbow. "I'll come with you. It'll be quicker for the two of us. Every drop is worth its weight in gold to him now." Julia only sobbed, nodded sluggishly, and went with Bridget, letting herself be drawn toward the unremarkable door marked on her room. And inside, everything clenched with fear and some crazy, mystical hope that suddenly a miracle would happen. Suddenly their blood, pouring in, would help Sylvester to get out, at least keep him in this world. There was no way such a good man could die. Bridget, of course, had long since got used to death. but she wanted to tear Sylvester from its claws as if he were her own. Gritting her teeth, she watched the dark ruby trickle of her blood. Julia, white as a sheet, shook her head stubbornly at the nurse's request for a break. No way. Time was of the essence right now. Human life is at stake, she replied. When the right amount of blood was drawn, Bridget clung to the wall and walked downstairs to the blood bank, handing over the necessary paperwork and receiving blood bags in exchange. She made her way to the operating theater, handed them to the surgeons. Take it, save it. She flashed her eyes. And no tricks. If anything, we'll open our veins, we'll give everything to the last drop. And went to Julia to wait. Now only to wait. Bill could hardly move his legs from fatigue after his work in the laundry, but when he heard about the incident, he came at once. He burst into the donor room, rolling up his sleeve as he went. Where do they give blood here? I want some for Sylvester, too. Bridget nodded silently at the couch. Lie down, we'll be right there. What a day. What a nightmare. I can't wait to help. When the transfusions were finished and the doctors came out of the operating theater, their faces brightening, Bridget staggered over to them. Well? How is he, doctor? He pulled off his mask, smiled with the corner of his mouth. He'll live, but he'd be long gone if it weren't for your blood, all three of you. He looked thoughtfully at Julia, Bridget, and Bill. Amazingly, this man, he nodded at the former tramp, has the same blood type and RH as Sylvester. B negative. It's so rare, it's amazing, said the doctor. I thought they were brothers, for God's sake. Bridget's eyebrows went up. Brothers? Sylvester and Bill? It couldn't be. Though a fragmentary childhood memory came to mind. Nanny had said something about a little brother who'd been adopted and taken from their orphanage. Sylvester had grown up in an orphanage too, he told me. His mom wasn't his birth mother, she adopted him. And Bill was from the orphanage, but he didn't know anything about his brothers and sisters. Really, Julia sobbed. Doctor, why don't we really check it out? What if they really are family? I mean, miracles do happen. Bridget just waved her hand. We've all had enough miracles without miracles. But she said something else. Why don't we just do a DNA test? And that would be the end of it. The surgeon shrugged. Why not if it's such a big deal? I was curious. Just a minute he disappeared into the lab and came out a quarter of an hour later with a sheet of paper in his hands. His eyes glittered with excitement. Hold on. The truth is about to be revealed. Now samples number 1. Bridget, Julia, and Bill held their breath. Could Bill really be Sylvester's brother? It's almost a miracle. A tramp and a surgeon separated as children, meeting again. It's mind-boggling. But the doctor's next words left Bridget frozen with her mouth hanging open. Samples 1 and 2 don't match. No relation. And here he shifted his dazed gaze to Bridget. And here's sample number 3. That's you, Bridget, and Sylvester's. You're his sister, by the looks of it. Bridget's eyes darkened. They're joking, aren't they? What sister is she to Sylvester? Oh, please. Julia spoke up, her voice weak with shock. Wait a minute, but you said yourself that Bill and Sylvester have the same blood type. How could they be? The doctor coughed embarrassedly into his fist. There's been a mistake. My fault, I got confused. Nerves, you know. In fact, it was the female sample that matched Sylvester's. What a story. Bridget clutched her head. No, this is too much. That's the last thing I needed was a relative. And then there was Sylvester. She didn't have time to think about it, because a crying but smiling nurse came out of the intensive care unit. Sylvester's awake. He came to his senses, still weak, but conscious. Oh, thank God. Bridget's legs gave out. 'Tis her named brother alive, her everlasting kin. A man alive. The next few days merged for all into one endless whirlwind of joy. Sylvester was rapidly improving. Julia, Bridget, Bill, and Julia ran into his room, laughing, crying, hugging. and when it was revealed that he and Bridget were related, it was a madhouse. Sylvester laughed and cried at the same time and kissed Bridget on both cheeks. "My dear sister, you should know how I've been looking for you all these years. When Mum took me away, she wanted to take you too. But something went wrong with the documents. They messed up in the orphanage, and we lost you." It turned out that Sylvester also vaguely remembered he had a sister, just a baby. But in the orphanage they were separated, and after that he was adopted alone. His foster mother kept promising, "I'll find your sister, she won't go anywhere." Somewhere the ends went into the water, as if the girl never existed. But now they had found each other again, and would never part again. So many lost years, so much unspoken love. Now just hang on, we'll make up for everything. And there's nothing to say about Bill. He walked round the ward with his chest out of the mud and into the dukes. Bill quit drinking. Not a step away from Bridget. Maybe they'll get registered in their old age. Julia and Sylvester had finally got things back on track. What can we do now? He saved her life, she paid him back. So it was fate. They had a modest wedding, just for their own people. But they were so happy, words can't describe it. Bridget married Bill. He got a job as an orderly, and now he works at the hospital with his wife. The kids are friends. Amanda and Martin are inseparable. The superintendent was sacked when the story broke and then put on trial. He got off with a suspended sentence, but of course his career could now be forgotten. Lester, on the other hand, went away for a long time for attempted murder and past offenses. A criminal's share of the torment. And the newfound relatives were only more united after all the trouble. Each other is now a mountain, often gather families together, drink tea, remember the past. The former orphans are making plans to live together. Bridget looks at her brother, at her husband, at her daughters, at Julia, who has become her best friend. Tears well up in her eyes at the joy and emotion that overwhelms her. Opening the door at the knock, the widower was stunned to see a nun with twins. He had not expected such a surprise. P4. Christian walked slowly to the bus stop. It was Thursday and he still had 2 days left to work, when he would gladly say goodbye to his factory to spend the weekend without it. For years now, the man had worked at the trailer plant as the former saint. Louis Plant was called. It had once rattled the country. They made good quality truck trailers, so those who knew how to use them bought them, both for their business and for their personal use. But like everywhere else, times have changed, and the former large factory was emptied. Not that it was completely closed, but many shops were rented by furniture factories and plastic window manufacturers. In general, the big for the city production was closed. The state administration was trying to keep it going, but it barely had a glimmer of life in it. That's why Christian stayed there. He used to have a pretty good job by those standards. He even managed to work as chief engineer for a while. But the plant quickly began to decline, and the chief engineer began to lose its relevance. The man returned to his former post and worked for a few more years as an engineer. But the decline could not be prevented. Therefore, Christian was forced to combine in one person an engineer, a fitter, and a mechanic. For so many years, the man became so accustomed to his factory that he agreed to such conditions. But every year the work became more and more difficult. Not only age, but also great disappointment had an impact. A bus pulled up and the man got on it. There were no more free seats, so he huddled at the end of the cabin near the window. It was rush hour, and there was no point in waiting for another, freer bus. Christian stared blankly out the window. There was a traffic jam on the bypass as usual. The man sighed with frustration. This is how it is in my life, he thought. Every day I run into the same traffic jam, but I can't decide to take a new route. How much more patience do I have? Sometimes I think I'll give it all up in a heartbeat because I can't do it anymore. Christian Thompson was a native of the bountiful Houston area of Texas. His town of Burkeville had once, like many others in the region, thrived on farms and ranches. Not to say that the young lad's parents were wealthy men. But his father told his son at once that he must get an education. Austin Thompson's older sister lived in Chicago. There he also wanted to send his son to study at the institute. Aunt Christiana promised to shelter the boy for the duration of his studies at her place, which meant that the boy would never be hungry and would always wear nice clothes that Aunt Caroline bought for him. It's hard to say what the young man wanted then, but Christian was not particularly eager to study engineering and did not want to leave his hometown. And that would have been all right. Maybe Christian would have stayed after studying in Chicago, which he eventually got used to, if it weren't for one thing. Carl Hill was the town administrator at the time. He held on to his position with a deadly grip. Of course, he turned a few things around for himself from time to time. He had a beautiful daughter, Madison. She was in the same class as Christian. For years, the girl had been in love with Christian, and the older she got, the more she thought about how she could marry him. The fact that he went to study in Chicago, she was not particularly embarrassed. He usually came home for the holidays, and they saw each other a lot. You don't need him. Carl used to swear at his daughter. There are so many nice guys out there, and you're clinging to your Christian like a bulldog that you can't get away from him. He was angry. Daddy, I love him. The girl sobbed. If I ever marry, it'll be to him. Madison's father tried to persuade her, but nothing worked, so he went to Austin Thompson. Hello, Austin. I've got something serious to say to you, Carl said. What is it, Carl? Austin was surprised. Do they want to check the fields again? No, it's a personal matter, he said dryly. You and I need to talk about Christian. About Christian? The farmer asked in surprise. Come on, let's go and talk. What's wrong with my Christian? Austin, your Christian is a good guy, said the town administrator from afar. He doesn't drink too much, he's a smart guy. Here's what I'm thinking. Should we do Christian's wedding to Madison? Not only is my daughter beautiful, but she's a hard worker. No bad deeds to speak of. You want to marry your Madison to my Christian? Austin looked at him in amazement. He still has 2 years of schooling to go. It's okay. Madison loves him so much that she'll wait, Carl smiled. Besides, I'm not going to hurt them. You know me, they'll live happily ever after. Carl, I don't know. Christian's father scratched his head. He hasn't thought about marriage yet. And anyway, maybe he has someone in Chicago? Do you think he tells me that? The farmer laughed. Austin, but you talked to him. Madison's father looked at him carefully. Explain everything to him. He'll listen to you. There's no reason for him to go to a foreign country when he has such a bride waiting for him at home. Christian's father was puzzled by his conversation with the receptionist. It wasn't that he was against Madison, but he'd rather have his son make his own choice. Austin, I think Carl is right. Camila, Christian's mother, supported the administrator. Let him come home. Carl will give him a good place here. With his education, everything is possible here. And Madison is a good girl, homely. She'll be a good hostess. What if he already has someone there? Dad objected. We're spoiling the guy's life plans. So what she said coldly. Is it better for you that your son is here, at your side, in a good position, or in some unknown place carrying sacks? You're the father, you talk to him about it. For a long time, Austin put off talking to his son. It was just before Christmas when he called him. Well, son, don't you miss home? Father asked cautiously. What are your plans after graduation? Honestly, I do, Christian answered. I'm used to Chicago after all these years, but I still want to go home. I don't know about plans yet. Well, maybe you have a job in mind, Austin continued. Or a serious relationship. I don't have either of those things. Christian answered with annoyance in his voice. I think about it all the time myself. I look at job ads to see what's on offer here. What about Madison Hill? Austin couldn't help himself. She's a good girl, and you know who her father is. What's Madison got to do with it? I don't get it, the boy said. Son, we just found out recently that Madison has been in love with you for a long time, his father said quietly. So we thought you two would make a good couple. Dad, I don't really see her as my girlfriend, Christian laughed. To be honest, I've never even thought about it. But look at her, son, insisted his father. Carl promises you a good position. Have you already decided everything without me? The boy got angry, but then added more calmly, "All right, I'll think about it. I'll probably go home anyway." Austin shuddered. The bus driver braked sharply. The man cursed to himself, but it was all right, and he stared out the window again. Behind him the trees appeared, from which a strong wind was tearing off autumn leaves. "This is how another year will soon end," the man whispered annoyingly. "And the next one I'll be 55 already. How quickly old age has come," he sighed. Austin sank back into his thoughts. The bus was taking him northwest, and he knew the route by heart. After the fourth-year session, Christian came home. He had already given his father his consent, so all their relatives were preparing for the matchmaking. "I don't want to marry Madison," the boy hesitated. "I don't like her. But maybe that's how it happens. First you don't like her, and then you love her." "Well, son," his father said to him a few days later, "are you ready for matchmaking?" "Oh, Dad, I don't know," the son confessed frankly. "I'm not going to Madison's house." "It'll all blow over," his mother assured him. "Do you think I married your father for love? Rarely do people marry for love. I think true love comes later, when you have a family. Your father and I have been together for years, and I wouldn't trade him for anyone else." The matchmaking was a big deal. You couldn't make a mockery of it in front of the chief of the town. Christian's uncle was a big talker. He had, as they say, a loose tongue. The whole matchmaking thing was fun. He never shut up. "Well, Christian, son," Carl hugged him. "Madison's going to wait for you for a year. And next August we'll have a wedding." Madison was incredibly beautiful. She stood in a soft pink dress and kept lowering her eyes in embarrassment. "Can we really make it work and have a good life looking at the girl?" the guy thought. "Madison is actually very pretty." After the matchmaking, the young men started dating. They needed to get to know each other better. Christian told her stories from his life in Chicago. The girl listened to them with interest. Madison talked about their life in the village, told the boy about her dreams. "You know, Christian, I want so much for our children to stay in the village like we did. To run their own business," the girl said with tenderness in her voice. "But still, some of them will want to study, and some of them will even be against staying here and will go to the city." The boy objected to her. "Yes, I understand," Madison sighed. "You know, I'd like to build a family nest so our chicks won't leave it." She laughed. She laughed. Madison was ordinary in Christian's eyes. She wasn't educated. Carl didn't want to let her go to town. But there was some worldly wisdom in her. She was easy for a guy to be with. By the end of the summer, Christian even thought he was falling in love with Madison. When the guy went back to Chicago, they talked almost every day on the phone his aunt had in her flat. And Christian had gotten so used to it that when a major event happened in his life, he was just blown away. So many years passed, but Christian never thought about it. One day he made a promise to himself that the man had kept for years. The bus turned onto a familiar street and Christian caught his breath. He got off at the stop and headed towards the traffic lights. He needed to cross to the other side of the street, and there he could say he was already at work. The man pulled out his pass and walked through the gatehouse. A crowd was already gathering in the lobby. Everyone was in a hurry to get to work. Christian walked outside and headed towards his building. "Christian, hello," the director ran up to him. "What about the order? We have all the details ready." "Yesterday, Charles and I finished the 20th piece out of 30, he replied. "So we should probably be done by today and tomorrow." "All right," smiled the chief. "You'll let me know when everything will be ready." The man nodded his head and went towards the workroom. His partner was already sitting there, having changed his clothes. "Well, Charles," Christian said, "can we finish it today and tomorrow?" "You bet," the boy smiled broadly at Christian. "Honestly, I'm tired of these billets," said Christian. "These blanks are so uncomfortable to work with." The man and the boy went into the workshop and started up their machines. Christian sank back into his thoughts. "Son, do you want me to turn Carl down now?" His father shouted angrily, talking to Christian on the phone. "No, that's not going to happen. The wedding will be in August, just like we planned it." The guy was coming home with a heavy heart after defending his diploma. The next day he invited his aunt to a cafe as a thank you. But another day later he left quickly. He never came to Chicago after that. The wedding was very expensive. Carl was marrying off his only daughter, so despite all his greed, he organized the holiday with all the scope. Almost the entire village was at the wedding. Madison signed all the marriage documents and looked at the guests, happy. "Christian, I'm so happy," she whispered to her fiancé. "I'll never forget this day." The guy also realized that he would never forget this day. Only unlike his bride, it was the most mournful day of his life. Several years passed. Christian worked as an engineer in administration. He and Madison had a good life. Over time, the guy settled down, if you could call it that, appreciated Madison, and began to feel happy too. Everything would have been great, but as often happens in such cases, there was one but it did not work out for young people to have children. Nobody knew what the reason was. They went to Los Angeles and New York. But all the doctors said that it was too early. 2 years for family life is not an indicator. But then 5 years went by, and 7 years went by, and 10 years went by. Madison came in crying one day. "Christian, I can't take it anymore," she sobbed. "I'm begging you, let's get out of here. People's tongues are driving me crazy with their gossip. I don't want to see anyone else here." People were cruel to other people's grief. Every now and then someone would come up with one version or the other. Why didn't Madison and Christian have kids? "It's the right thing to do," the neighbors said to the woman. "Her father stole so much for himself back in the day. Now she's paying for his sins." And he walked around here like a master, sticking his nose up. The neighbors supported the conversation. He looked down on everyone, and when he pities someone, he doesn't. On the contrary, he drowned that person. "I heard that Christian is walking away from Madison." An elderly man intervened in the conversation. "He found someone from a neighboring town. That's why they don't have children, because they sleep in separate beds at night." Father Madison didn't have as much power as he used to. He had stepped down as mayor and couldn't shut his mouth to anyone else. He realized that Madison's town was suffering. Everyone turned against her in an instant. "All right," Madison, Carl said to his daughter one day. "Sell the house here and buy a flat in Los Angeles. I'll give you some extra money." Christian was so used to his life in the city that he didn't really want to go to the big city, and all the hustle and bustle of the capital tired him out. But seeing the suffering of his wife, the man finally agreed to move. So in the life of Christian appeared trailers, where he worked for almost 20 years. "Charles, drop everything. Let's go to lunch," shouted the man to his partner. "It's after 2 o'clock. "Well, we've done a lot of work today," the guy laughed as they went into the room. "Christian, I want to give you a treat today." Taking jar after jar out of the bag, Charles smiled. "It was Mom who told me to give you her famous tomato juice. And some very tasty winter vegetables too. Oh my God, 2 jars of raspberry jam. I almost forgot." "Oh, Charles, thank you," said the man. "And tell your mom thank you very much for me. How I've missed such homemade goodies. You know, since my mother died 2 years ago, I have never tasted such delicacies." "You're welcome to eat it," Charles rejoiced. "For a man like you, it's not a pity. You know, I'm lucky to have you. You never swear, you don't pry." The workers had lunch and talked for about half an hour. Then they went back to their machines. The time for work fled imperceptibly. It was already 16:45. The foreman looked at his watch. "Charles, well, let's finish. There are 7 blanks left for tomorrow. I reckon we'll have them done by 4 o'clock. The man and the lad went out through the gatehouse into the street together. Charles went in the opposite direction. He lived in the neighborhood. Christian wandered towards the bus stop. Here's another day gone, he thought as he shivered in the cold Los Angeles wind. Just wish the bus would come faster. I just have to make it to Friday. The bus came, and the man got on it. It was crowded again. The passenger stood in the aisle, hung on the bar, and immersed himself. It was already dark outside, and Christian closed his eyes from fatigue. Suddenly someone shoved him, and there was a clinking of cans. God, I wish they hadn't broken. The man pulled the bag to his chest. Such wealth should be protected, he smiled. The bus seemed to go on endlessly. It took about an hour and a half before it appeared in the southwest. Christian got off of it and walked towards his apartment block. He entered the entranceway, which immediately smelled old and damp. Why aren't there any scents for these old entrances? The man clamped his nose. Sometimes there's nothing to breathe in here. Christian went home and changed his clothes. His stomach rumbled so much that he didn't bother with any formalities. He opened a can of tomatoes and reached in with his hand. "What a delicious meal," the man murmured. "It's been a long time since I've had such a delicious meal. Where were my fried potatoes in the fridge? Together it's going to be a real bomb." Christian ate dinner, washed the dishes, and sat down on his favorite sofa. The television was sometimes a real outlet for him. Not that he was into political squabbles, but watching some films made him forget his loneliness. The man glanced at the sideboard. There, a picture of his wife Madison stood in the most prominent place. Since moving to Los Angeles, Madison had been trying to get a job somewhere. Staying at home in the flat was very hard for her. They had neither a summer cottage nor a farm, and that made the woman even more discouraged. She dreamed of having children, but she and her husband had no luck. Maybe it was the longing for their native places. Maybe it was Madison's failure to fulfill herself as a mother. The woman began to fade. At first, Christian thought his wife was really depressed, so he often sent her home to her father, but it didn't help. Carl was also very worried about his daughter. Madison began to take first to doctors, then to all sorts of women. But the woman never recovered. At the age of 42, Madison died. She was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Christian suffered a lot at first. He had grown so accustomed to his Madison over the years that he couldn't imagine life without her. The man often sat silently in his flat for hours on end. Only work saved him. But come the weekend, it would start all over again. Carl insisted that his daughter was buried in his hometown, so Christian often did not come to her. And in time he realized that he had to let it all go, or his life would end just as soon. Christian took the picture of his wife in his hands, looking at it closely. Madison was so beautiful in it. Radiant smile, he thought. Would she be alive now if we hadn't moved to the city? It was a question that had been on his mind all these years. That night the man did not sleep well. A longing came over him, and by midnight tears began to choke him. Christian cried for both his Madison and himself. He was alone, left with no one to care for him. 5 years ago his father died first, and a couple of years ago his mother died as well. He had no siblings. His father's older sister from Chicago was still alive. But that topic was closed once and for all for the man. The next morning Christian looked at himself in the mirror in horror. His eyes were puffy. "God, it's like I've been drinking all night," he said in shock. "And I have to work today." He tried a massage, and after an hour his eyes looked better. Christian got dressed and went to his bus stop. And that morning it was the same as always. The bus took him to work and left. The man crossed Wilshire Avenue and walked through the gatehouse. "Christian, are you sick?" Charles asked worriedly, looking at the foreman's swollen face. "Yes, I haven't slept all night," he admitted. "Do you know how lonely it is at that age?" The man sighed. "Sometimes you feel so much pressure that you don't want to live." "Christian, you're still so young. You should get married," the assistant said seriously. "What's your age? You're not 70 years old." Though even at that age some people manage to have affairs. "Charles, where am I going to find a normal woman at that age?" he asked with frustration in his voice. "Nobody wants romantics like me." "Come on," laughed the boy. "My uncle got married for the 5th time when he was 65. "Wow," laughed the foreman. "He didn't get a medal for that. How much nerve you have to have for 5 wives. I certainly would not have endured so many of them." "As he says, I was happy with each of them," Charles replied. "That's why, at 75, he's blooming and smelling." "Charles, I'm dreaming that you and I will get through the day and finally go away for the weekend." Christian smiled. Dreaming of a new wife was too much for him. By 4 o'clock, they had worked the remaining 7 billets. They could go home early today. It was an unspoken rule between him and the director. Nicholas approached the chief of men. "That's it," he said. "So let's look at engineering from Monday, because I'm already tired of this machine." He agreed. "We need to finish the project there. You look at the drawings then." That's my job, Christian sighed. I'm the reaper, I play the tune, and I warm myself by the stove. Christian, what can I do? Nicholas looked at him tiredly. If we had other volumes, I could take more men. But we are living from bread to kivashu. I understand everything, answered the engineer. I have no complaints about you, to ruin such a plant. Try to build such a plant again. It would cost $1 billion. Yes, sighed the chief. How hard and time-consuming it is to build, but so quick and easy to destroy. That evening, Christian opened another can that Charles's mum had given him. He crunched the delicious pickled vegetables with pleasure. Then he felt homesick again and couldn't sleep for a very long time. All right, tomorrow is a day off anyway. I'll sleep till lunchtime, said the man, when he saw the clock hand frozen on the number 3. It was raining outside the window in October, and Christian slept until lunchtime. He opened his eyes with difficulty. The man lay in bed for a while longer. The heating hadn't been switched on yet, and the flat was cold. Who invented this stupid rule that the heating must be switched on when the average daily temperature has not exceeded 8 degrees centigrade for 5 days? Christian was indignant. And the fact that it's so cold in the flat that you don't even have to take off your coat is of no interest to anyone, especially here with these damn winds. How could a city be built in such an inconvenient place? And it was true. Even though Los Angeles was in the west, it was always being blown around by the winds. There were times when even in the summer a strong, cold wind blew. The whirlwinds that swirled the praying rubbish bags in the air here lifted up to the very top floors of the 14-story buildings. Finally, Christian crawled out of his bed and, wrapping himself in a blanket, went to the kitchen. 5 minutes later, his body was warmed by hot tea. This is how to go outside. He watched in horror as the rain poured down and the wind bent the trees to the ground. You can't take an umbrella with you, the wind will break it at once. For half an hour, the man tried to go through his wardrobe to find something to wear. The fridge was empty, except for the raspberry jam Charles's mum had given him and half a forkful of cabbage. Well, God willing, Christian said to himself and pulled on his Macintosh. He went out into the street. He walked hard against the wind to get to the nearest shop. The rain was hitting him right in the face. I'll beat you anyway, the man thought, looking at his high rubber boots. I'm sure you won't get my feet wet. Finally, he opened the door to the shop and took out his big bag. Why did he reach into his pocket and pull out the list? So what have we got here? He looked down the list. Potatoes, carrots, beetroot, butter, soup set, kefir, 2 yogurts. Christian, read. In general, you don't even have to read, but just take everything I see from the shelves, he sighed. The man spent about an hour in the shop. His basket was completely full. Did he forget anything? He asked himself. I don't think so. And he hadn't taken anything extra. It was harder for the wind to move the man. But in spite of the weight of the bag, he was being tossed back and forth by the wind. What is this lousy climate? Christian cursed. It's called the South. It wasn't this cold in Minneapolis. Though Minneapolis had long since been renamed, the man had never called it that. It remained Minneapolis to him forever. Christian returned home. He understood that in this weather one should warm up with hot tea or hot soup, or rather borscht. Now that was another matter. A whiff enveloped the spoon where the hot borscht was steaming. Now I won't freeze, Christian thought, but the day was so gray and dull that he didn't feel like doing anything. Sometimes on weekends he read a magazine, but today the man was in no mood at all. He lay down on his old sofa and fell asleep almost instantly. Young Christian paced nervously on the platform. It was hot outside. At last a train approached, and the boy boarded it. It was a few minutes before the train was due to depart, when suddenly a familiar face appeared on the platform. "Christian," shouted the girl. "Christian." She ran from one carriage to another. Suddenly she saw his face in the window and ran to the carriage door. But the conductor had already raised the steps, and the train moved quietly on. "Christian." The girl ran back to the window where she saw the boy. "I love you. Don't go away." She ran after the carriage. The girl reached the end of the platform and stopped. She shouted something for a long time. Christian saw her tears, her voice pierced his whole body, and he woke up sharply. "Why am I dreaming about her?" he shouted in anger. "When are you going to leave me alone?" With anger, Christian threw his pillow on the floor. He sat down unhappily on the sofa. He generally didn't like to remember what had happened to him back then, but about 10 years ago, he had started to be haunted by the same dream. Christian always felt bad after it. To divert his attention, he walked over to the sideboard and picked up his wife's photograph. "I did the right thing," then he said loudly, "so let everyone leave me alone." After a few minutes, he began to feel better. The man got up and went into the kitchen to put the kettle on. "The ladder will give me a chance to warm up," he said sadly, "and you can't go out in this weather." He could go shopping, but Christian didn't want to go out in this wind and rain. He turned on the TV, changed channels, and found some kind of film. "Detective isn't on right now," he sighed and changed the channel. There was a program about becoming a father. "Well, we'll see," Christian smiled. "Even though I don't need it, I'll look at the little kids and maybe I'll be in a better mood. They are all so cute." The man listened with interest as the young dads talked about the difficulties of parenthood. Some couldn't sleep at night, some were afraid to approach their child for a while. There were some who developed depression and tried to avoid their newborn babies. "I wonder what kind of dad I would be." Christian thought. Would I be able to hold a newborn so easily? And how would I feel? The man didn't notice how quickly the time flew by. He savored the feelings that babies evoked in his heart. "Oh, what a pretty little thing." He laughed as he looked at the 3-month-old boy on the screen. He is already trying to hold his head up. I wish I had the kind of courage these kids have. It seems that they are not afraid of anything in life. They are interested in trying everything. This little girl is looking at rattles with such interest. You can see that she's studying it. The program ended and Christian's mood lifted. The sight of little children seemed to breathe life into him. The man smiled all evening. "How I would like to hold such a baby in my arms at least once," he said dreamily. That evening he went to bed early and, to his great surprise, fell asleep without any problems. But here are the miracles, really. Looking out of the window, Christian looked out. Yesterday it had been deep autumn, and today it was true spring. The sun had been shining outside since morning, and it was very warm for October. No way, the man wondered. Has Indian summer begun, or is it its continuation? We should definitely go out today, because now we don't know when the weather will be so nice. Christian got dressed and went out onto the balcony. He could hear birds singing in the trees. The man pressed the lift button and went outside. Where should I go? He stopped in bewilderment on the street. To Victory Park. I don't want to. There are all those awful merry-go-rounds and unpleasant sounds there. You have to go so far away from the central alley there not to hear all that. Why don't we go to Chilean or Taman Forest? There'll be a lot of people there tonight, so I won't get lost. Probably the Taman Forest, Christian decided. Indeed, because of the good weather, there were a lot of people walking around the park. There were parents with their children, who ran merrily along the paths and constantly asked their mums and dads questions. Breathing was easy and good. Colorful leaves were falling from above, and there was no beginning or end to this waltz. Christian saw a tree lying on the ground and sat down on it. The man closed his eyes with pleasure. It's so nice here, he whispered. The air is so fresh after the rain. The main paths were asphalted, so it was safe to walk here without fear of mud. Christian still wanted to walk around the park for a while, but he was so hungry that he couldn't stand the feeling of hunger any longer. The man walked out of the forest and headed towards the bus stop. Today was a wonderful day, he smiled. A walk like this is good for me. It chased away all my moping. Finally, the man got off at the bus stop and headed towards his house. He stroked his stomach with anticipation. Christian quickly jumped into the lift and eagerly opened the door to his flat. He quickly undressed and put the borscht on the cooker. With light movements, he sliced the sausage into large slices and sat down at the table. No sooner had he taken the spoon in his hand than the doorbell rang. Damn it, Christian swore. Who the hell is that? He got up unhappily from the table and headed for the door. The man looked through the peephole in amazement. Some women in black clothes were standing in the corridor. Oh my God, who is that? He thought in shock. Christian decided not to open the door yet, but the strangers on the other side were not satisfied with that decision. The women continued to press the bell. Who is it? What do you want? Christian couldn't take it anymore. We want Christian Thompson, came a woman's voice. We're from the convent. What convent? The man marveled. You must have me confused with someone else. I have nothing to do with religion. From the St. John of Mary convent came the same voice. I'm Mother Superior. Please open up. We have very important business to discuss with you. Christian hesitated for a while and opened the door. The man looked at the uninvited guests with a displeased look. What business do you have with me? He said coldly. But let's make it quick, because I'm very busy. I'm sorry, but I can't tell you everything in a minute, said the nun with kindness in her voice. You see, a few days ago, a young woman came to our monastery for a tour. She looked to be about 30 years old. She asked to meet me and talk to me. We talked about her personal life. The woman asked me to give her advice on what she should do. She called herself Nancy, but I don't think that was her real name. She came to the convent a few times, but when we made our rounds this morning, we found this. She pointed to a basket of some kind. It was quite capacious. Well, what is it? What does it have to do with? The man asked with interest. Well, as far as I am concerned, it has something to do with you, Mother Superior sighed and took the basket from her novice's hands. The woman opened the coverlet and Christian immediately turned pale. In it, 2 little girls were sleeping sweetly. They were boys, judging from their blue suits. Whose children are these? He couldn't stand it. What have they got to do with me? Well, read this. The nun held out the note. We found this in the basket with the children. I'm sorry, but I can't keep these children anyway. By the time you find them, I'll be long gone. I'm leaving the country forever. I ask you very much to find my father, Christian Thompson, and give him my children, read the landlord. This is some kind of mistake, shouted the man. I don't have any children. My wife and I have never been able to have a child, and I've never had anyone but her. Well, we can do a DNA test, and then you will decide what you want to do with the babies. Mother Superior looked at him sternly. I'm not going to do anything, Christian said indignantly. I can see that someone is trying to set me up. I don't know if you have anything to do with these children, the nun continued. But what I do know is that you will have to deal with the police, and they will interrogate you in any case until a genetic test for your relationship is carried out. The woman did not lower her voice. So it's up to you, either you deal with us or with the police. But if they're not my grandchildren, what then? The man tried to dodge. You will apologize to me for making me nervous. I serve God, she replied calmly. And for him, the most innocent are defenseless children. I have nothing to apologize for. All right, Christian gave up. What am I to do with them now? The children will stay with us for the time being, Mother Superior smiled. Until you have a DNA test. Besides, there's always the possibility that their mother will change her mind and take them back. Okay, I'll come by tomorrow before lunch and find out how we can get that test done. The man said unhappily and looked questioningly at the women. Is there anything else? No, replied the guest. Thank you. We will be expecting you tomorrow. Please try to make it as soon as possible. We can't keep the boys here for long either. It's illegal. Christian closed his door. He lost his appetite and lay down on the sofa, exhausted. What a good start to the day, he resented. They had to ruin it like that. I had no one but Madison. Somebody was trying to make a fool out of me. Somebody was trying to set me up. But I'll show you. You think it's that easy to pin all this on me? I'm sure your test won't show any parentage. The next day, Christian woke up in a terrible mood. Not only did he have a headache, but he also had to ask Nicholas for time off. Today they were going to look at old and new projects, but the chief, without telling him anything, allowed him to do his own thing until lunchtime. I have to spend so much money on this rubbish. Christian said in shock when he was told the price for the test. "I have nothing else to do. Who will reimburse me for all this?" In spite of his inner protests, he asked the nurse to come to the monastery and take the test for him and the babies. The man looked furtively at the babies. He was drawn to them by some invisible force. Christian quickly restrained himself and left the convent room. "The test will be ready in 5 days," the nurse said. "You'll get a notification on your phone." 5 days. The man asked in horror. "Is that how long you have to wait?" "Unfortunately, it can't be any quicker," she explained. "The reagents have to be aged for a certain period of time so that the right genes can be detected." A sullen Christian went back to work. Nothing pleased him. He had hoped that the next day he would know the results and forget about the case once and for all. But now it turned out that he would have to suffer for 5 whole days. Who could have given this girl this idea? Thought the engineer. How did she even know my name? Maybe one of my former colleagues played a joke on me like that. And now I have to deal with all this. The man sat there thinking about his own thoughts while the director explained something to him. "Well, do you agree?" Nicholas asked him. "Shall we do it that way?" "What?" Christian came back to reality. "I'm sorry I wasn't listening to what you said." "Christian, is something wrong with you?" The chief asked him worriedly. "Don't even think about being sick. We've got a big order for parts coming in." "No, it's just that I was up all night with a headache," he replied. "What did you say to me again?" "After work." For the first time in a long time, Christian didn't want to go home. He had a feeling that something bad was waiting for him there. Or rather, there was some kind of surprise waiting for him there. What could be worse than what had already happened? He pondered. Only if it all turns out to be true, a thought popped into his head. The man stopped abruptly. It was as if he was dumbfounded. Christian realized that such a thing was simply impossible. But something inside insisted that by some miracle it had happened. "I'll go crazy while I wait for this result," the man said out loud and walked towards the bus stop. The bus was traveling as it always did. But it seemed to the man that this day the bus was just flying. He looked at his watch, but the bus was on schedule. "How I don't want to go home." He stopped. "I'll go somewhere and take a walk." Christian turned round and walked in the opposite direction from his house. The weather wasn't bad today either, not as warm as yesterday, but still. It was starting to get dark, and passers-by were bustling in the street. A man stopped near some public garden and stood there for a long time. It was as if he had fallen somewhere. He was not interested neither in the dog that ran up to him and started barking at him, nor in the loving couple sitting on the bench, nor in the loud music of teenagers. It was as if everything had stopped, but the man felt such a warmth on his heart that he was even afraid to move. Christian was afraid that if he took even one step, this lightness would immediately disappear. "God, what's happening to me?" He finally came to his senses. "What am I doing here? Oh my God, it's 8 o'clock. I've got to go home." He walked briskly towards his house, having a light supper because he had lost his appetite. Sweet tea and a scone sufficiently satisfied his hunger, and he went to bed. Some strange things are happening to me, a thought occurred to him. What does it all mean, he thought, and with this question he fell asleep. 3 days passed, and the man even somehow calmed down. He no longer thought about the test. He had the confidence that everything was going to be all right. I had nothing to do with it at all, he rejoiced at his intuition. I'll finally get the test back tomorrow and get on with my life again. Christian excused himself from work an hour early so he could pick up the test at the lab in time. The man reluctantly changed his clothes and gathered his belongings. He said goodbye to Charles and walked out of the gatehouse. It was drizzling outside. Surprisingly, there was no wind. Christian opened his umbrella and walked to the bus stop. He didn't have to wait long. In 5 minutes, he was already sitting in the minibus. Well, I'll pick up everything quickly and go home right away, he dreamed. Tomorrow I'll be informed so they won't bother me anymore, he smiled. As it happened, the minibus was traveling very slowly. Christian fidgeted unhappily in his seat. It's like the disabled are driving, the passenger said angrily to himself. and who employs drivers like that. Another 20 minutes had passed when the driver told Christian that he was getting off at the next stop. The man thanked him just in case. He paid and quickly got off the shuttle bus. So where do I go next? He reasoned. They told me it was at the beginning of the street. Then I'd better turn here. Christian got lost and lost about 30 minutes. The man cursed out loud at himself and finally asked the passers-by for the right direction. 300 meters later, the starting numbers showed up. So it must be around here somewhere? He rejoiced and hurried to the beginning of the street. Christian ran into the lab and gave his name. About 5 minutes later, he was handed the result in an envelope. He opened it at once. 96%, Christian read aloud and turned pale. Then he came to his senses and approached the man at the counter. Tell me, please. Does 96% in the test mean that I have no relation? He asked excitedly. On the contrary, the girl smiled. 96% is a very high probability that you are related. You could say it is. Sabrina, can you hear me? The voice repeated insistently for several minutes to Sabrina. Finally, the girl opened her eyes and looked around at all the men and women present in white coats with an incomprehensible look. She realized that she was probably in a hospital. Where am I? Sabrina barely spoke. What happened to me? Paula. You fell off the scaffolding, the doctor answered her. Your daughter is staying with your mother for the time being. The girl closed her eyes tiredly and was pulled down again. From somewhere at the beginning of the tunnel, she could faintly hear sounds. Sabrina came to her senses again after a few days. This time the girl could already stay conscious. She could feel how much her back hurt and her right leg was twisted. The latter was in a cast. You're here for a long time, the nurse sighed. So you'd better stop fussing. We called your mother. The doctor said you could see her. My daughter Paula, said the victim. Ask her to bring my daughter. 2 days later, Sabrina's mother Chloe came. Her daughter didn't notice anything new about her. She was not embarrassed neither by the fact that Sabrina miraculously survived, nor by the fact that she had a quiet granddaughter. How long are you going to be examined here? Instead of greeting, her mother said arrogantly. I'm not here to babysit Paula. Well, you can see for yourself, replied the girl calmly. So you'll have to be patient. I have no relatives here except you. It's not enough that you gave birth to her. Now you want to hang her on me? The woman was angry. Don't even think about it. Hurry up, get up, I won't be with her. Sabrina remained silent and asked her daughter to come closer. The girl of about 5 years old cried and came to her mum. Mummy, the child sobbed, take me away. I don't want to live with my grandmother. She doesn't love me. And it was true. Chloe not only did not love her granddaughter, but she never loved her daughter either. The woman had spent her whole life thinking she was something special. She couldn't live with Sabrina's father. Or rather, he could not stand her arrogance and character and ran away from her. With his daughter, he never communicated for the reason that it was necessary to organize all this through her mother. Chloe from early childhood reproached her daughter for the fact that she was born into the world at all. But how much effort she's put into her, she thought. When the girl was 12, she saw very clearly that love from her mother she did not need to wait. Since that time, the girl, you could say, lived her own life. Sabrina studied well at school, entered the institute and finished it. The girl, as soon as she began to work part-time in the evening, immediately rented a room and moved out from her mother. She was not only not against it, but frankly scolded her daughter with the last words for the fact that it did not happen earlier. In general, with Sabrina's mother never had a friendly relationship, no matter how much she dreamed of it. Chloe thwarted all her attempts. The situation was aggravated by the fact that the girl got pregnant and gave birth to the child herself. No one knew who was the father of Paula, but from that moment Sabrina's mother turned away from her so much that they completely stopped talking. Naturally, no help or support was given by her to her daughter. The girl worked to the last, even when she could barely walk with a big belly. Sabrina had a good friend, Diana, who helped her all this time. After the birth of Paula, Sabrina ran for part-time work together with a small child. The girl did not have her own place. Sometimes her friend sat with the baby. When Paula was 1.5 years old, Sabrina gave her to a kindergarten. The girl herself got a job at a construction site. She was not afraid of heights and easily plastered and made facades of buildings. After 3 years, Sabrina collected enough money to buy a small house in the suburbs. That's where she and Paula lived all this time. Sabrina herself did not realize how she had fallen from the scaffolding. The girl usually always used insurance. She only remembered her foot stumbling and the board bouncing off to the side. Then Sabrina saw herself flying and felt a strong impact, after which she lost consciousness. As the doctor said, she was lucky because it was only the 3rd floor. After Sabrina was brought to the hospital, the issue of Paula and her friend Diana came up. The girl was not given away at that time. They brought the child to her mother. This later played a very big negative role in Sabrina's life. The girl was in the hospital for almost 5 months. Then she was sent to a sanatorium for rehabilitation for another 6 months. All this time, Paula stayed with her mother. Finally, when the girl was discharged and she took her daughter, Sabrina was in complete shock. "I'm not going to eat this," said 6-year-old Paula with her arms crossed over her chest. "And I want to go to Grandma Chloe's. I'm going to live with her from now on. What happened to my child?" The woman looked at her daughter in shock. "Paula, I am your mother, so you will live with me," said Sabrina. "What kind of mother are you?" said the girl angrily. "Do you even know from whom you gave birth to me? Grandma Chloe had a husband, and you?" Sabrina turned pale. She looked at her child and could not recognize her. In almost a year, her mother had made Paula a real monster, just like herself. "And you tell the teacher that you don't want to live with her. Her grandmother used to teach her when she sneaked into the kindergarten. Tell her she beats you, she doesn't buy you anything. Then you will definitely live with me. That's what you want, isn't it?" "Of course, yes," the girl hugged Chloe. "I only love you alone. I don't need her." From that moment in Sabrina's life, there was one problem after another. Paula was always telling stories at daycare that her mother was treating her badly. The girl would sometimes sob for hours to get attention. The social welfare authorities called Sabrina every now and then. "Try to take her to a psychologist," one of the employees advised the woman. "I understand that you don't do all this with her, but there is a reason why she is making all this up. A psychologist will be able to explain it to you." Sabrina tried her best, but she had a lot of health problems after the fall. Her right leg was numb all the time, and she limped and couldn't walk fast enough. She could no longer get a good job. Her leg was hurting her lower abdomen, and she could hardly hold back her tears. "Diana, I'm probably going to go crazy," Sabrina once told her friend and burst into tears. "What am I going to do? Paula doesn't recognize me at all. She doesn't even call me by my first name. She doesn't even say Mum to me. How could my mother do this to me? I mean, she did it to me." Chloe was very pleased with herself. She finally took revenge on her daughter Sabrina for everything, for the fact that she took her time, for the pain of labor, for the cost she had incurred. Most importantly, for Sabrina giving birth to Paula by some guy. "Well, now we'll see," Chloe cheered. "You won't have a daughter anymore. Paula will belong to me." The woman looked lovingly at her sleeping granddaughter. The little girl was sleeping sweetly. "Lord, how can such a creature live, and such an angel?" she thought, wiping away her tears. "Paula, how I love you. Why are you doing this to me?" But then the girl would wake up and everything would happen again. She spoke to her mother in a lovely tone, blackmailed her into running away to her grandmother's. "Diana, I can't take it anymore," Sabrina came to her friend one day. "I can't take it anymore. Not only I can't work for a long time, my lower back and leg hurt, but now, apparently my right leg is constantly falling off when I'm nervous. Sometimes it just stops moving. I'm afraid I'm going to stop walking soon." "Sabrina," Diana said gently, "maybe you should talk to him. If you want, I'll tell Henry. He'll find his information." "He left me without Paula," she sighed. "What would I tell him about her? I'm sorry, but the one night we were together, I got pregnant. If he wanted to, he would have found me a long time ago. I'm not looking for him." Sabrina came in from a friend's house. Her leg hurt again. She lay down on the couch and closed her eyes. Scenes from her past life came before her. There was noise and commotion in the classroom. The first year was very turbulent. There were only 5 girls in a group of 20 students. All the students were looking at each other curiously. No one knew anyone yet. Sabrina sat alone at the last table. She was looking out the window and not participating in all the introductions. Suddenly some guy sat down in front of her. He put his bag down, but then abruptly turned to the girl and asked her something. She answered him briefly. It seemed to Sabrina that the guy was not from around here. That's how her first encounter with him happened. After a few months, Sabrina realized that she liked the guy. It was almost 5 years later when a romantic relationship began between them. Or rather, it didn't happen until May when they were writing their diploma. Fortunately or not, they were assigned to write their diploma together. Sabrina, the guy, approached her. "Look, I brought the blueprints. We still have to do this last calculation for the diploma." "Yes, everything seems to be good here." The girl looked at the scheme. "You're very good. You've done such a thorough job." She patted him on the shoulder. "Sabrina, let's go to a cafe," suggested the student. "I haven't been away from my desk for almost a week. Let's distract ourselves a little." The girl was very embarrassed. Despite the fact that she liked Christian very much, she was usually cold to him. Before she could answer him, the guy had already put all the blueprints in a tube and was waiting for her by the door. "Are you coming?" he urged the girl on. "Come on, hurry up. I'll tell you honestly, I'm very hungry." The young people went to the student cafe. There they sat for about 2 hours, discussing their diploma and its defense. "I think that you should present the theoretical part, and then I will present the drawings and calculations," Christian suggested. "Okay," Sabrina agreed. "I'm all for it. If you knew how much I dislike calculations." She laughed. "It will be our future work." Christian laughed and looked at her intently, but then he stopped and blushed. They sat in the cafe for a long time. Somehow they went home in one direction. Whether Christian saw the girl off that day or not, it was hard to say, but the young people stopped outside the house where Sabrina rented a room. "Will you stay here?" the girl asked him curiously. "Or will you go home?" "At first I really wanted to leave, but now I don't know," Christian said with annoyance in his voice. "I promised my father that I would come back." "What if you have a job here, a family?" The girl looked him in the eyes. "Well, it's all very complicated for me, Sabrina," he sighed. "I've tied myself to the house without realizing it. I gave my word and I can't break it." "Even if your fate depends on it," she smiled. "Even then, will you come back?" "I don't know," the boy answered tiredly. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not living my life. It's like I'm not in my life. My mother and father and other people are there. They want me to do what's best for them. But sooner or later it will all come out," the girl replied. "One day it will make you feel so unhappy." "Maybe you're right," Christian looked at her. "Sabrina, I really like you," he said suddenly. "But I can't." The guy turned abruptly and walked quickly away. The girl could not understand what to do, whether to run after him now or to leave everything as it was. From that day on, Christian began to avoid Sabrina. They met only formally to discuss the diploma. The girl felt that he cared about her, and it only made her feel more painful. Time flew by quickly, and the day of the diploma defense came. Christian and Sabrina defended it with honors. The boy couldn't stand it and approached her. "Let's celebrate our defense," he suggested her. "Let me buy you a last drink. Do you drink champagne?" "Christian, I'm a champagne drinker," she laughed. "I've only had champagne a few times in my life." "All right, let's have champagne," Christian suggested. "You and I will go to a restaurant," Grand Duchess Christian said. "To tell you the truth, I've never been there before, but we must try it sometime." The boys had a good meal and were on their way home late in the evening. Sabrina's champagne hit her head so hard she couldn't stay on her feet. "God, one glass made me so sick," she scolded angrily as Christian took her under his arm. "It's okay. I'll help you," the guy replied caringly. "Don't worry. Everything will be fine." In about 15 minutes, they were outside Sabrina's house. The girl tried to climb the steps, but almost fell down. "Oh shit," she cursed. "I've never had a drink, and after this time I won't drink again." "Which floor are we on?" She heard Christian's voice. "Let me take you up." They went up to the 3rd floor and Sabrina opened the door. But unfortunately, the girl fell when she took off her sandals. The boy picked her up in his arms and carried her into the room. Carefully, he placed the girl on the bed. "Christian, when are you going to leave? Please close the door," Sabrina asked him. "Because my landlady is in hospital and I'm living alone for the time being. I'll get up later and lock the door." The boy looked intently at the girl. He unconsciously reached out his hand and stroked her hair. Then he began to kiss her. The young people themselves did not notice how something very important happened between them. Christian looked at Sabrina. The girl was sound asleep. He quietly got dressed and left her flat. "God, what have I done?" he lamented. "But don't I love her?" argued 2 voices in his head. "I know for a fact that I love Sabrina. I can feel it. But what about Madison, Father?" His brain was exploding. "What am I going to tell them?" The next day, Christian tried to talk to his father, but he flatly refused to listen to him. "It's either us or Chicago," Austin said at the end of the conversation. Christian realized that Sabrina was waiting for him, and he needed to go to her. The guy was facing a very difficult choice. His father called him again and started threatening him. Christian packed his things, said goodbye to his aunt, and went to the train station. Sabrina finally found where he lived and rang the doorbell. "Yes, he left for the station about an hour ago," Aunt Caroline answered. "He's going home today." The girl rushed as fast as she could to the station, and then ran as fast as she could when the train was already on the platform. It took her 5 minutes to run through all the carriages. She spotted Christian, who was sitting on the side seat looking out the window. When he saw Sabrina, the guy jumped up and headed for the exit, but the doors closed right in front of his nose. There was a girl standing on the platform, shouting something to him. The guy rushed back to his seat. Sabrina ran up to him. She screamed that she loved him, begged him to stay. But it was like Christian was paralyzed. All he could do was sit and stare out the window. "I'm doing the right thing," it pounded in his head. "It's all in the past. I'll never even remember it." Sabrina sat on the platform for hours. She only went home when the tears stopped pouring from her eyes. Many times Sabrina wanted to find Christian and tell him that she was pregnant, but inside the girl felt like she would be in unbearable pain from their meeting. "It's not a question of Christian not loving me," she thought afterwards. "He couldn't come to his house with me, which means that either his parents didn't want me, or they had already found someone at home for him." So be it, Sabrina decided then. She came to her senses, gingerly getting up from her couch. She was overcome with such a longing that she even found it hard to breathe. "First Christian took my life from me," she sighed, "and now she is taking my daughter from me." And to her great regret, it was true. No matter how hard Sabrina tried in the following years to save Paula, she never succeeded. Her life was forever ruined by her own mother. "Where are you going?" Sabrina asked her daughter in amazement as she packed her things. "I'm going to my grandmother's house," 16-year-old Paula replied calmly. "I'm not going to live with you anymore, Paula. You're not 18 yet," her mother tried to reason with her. "I won't let you." "And who are you?" the girl asked with a brow in the air. "What have you done for me?" The woman looked at her daughter in shock. She smiled wryly. The girl did everything to make her mother feel pain from her words. "All right," Sabrina said suddenly to herself. "Let your grandmother do everything for you now. From now on, I will not interfere in your life." Paula left, and the woman sobbed for a long time. She couldn't come to her senses. But just as Sabrina expected, a few days later her mother called. "Do you have a conscience?" she said immediately. "I need money to support Paula." "Didn't you think of that when you turned my daughter against me?" The woman replied calmly. "Now you have to do it yourself. I will never give you or Paula a penny." And the woman switched off the phone and didn't hear how long her mother was cursing her with the very last words. Sabrina was in a lot of pain, but she had given herself her word that she had left her daughter forever. True, Paula came to her several times and with scandals tried to get money out of her mother, but all was unsuccessful. That's how Sabrina was left alone. With time she calmed down, her leg began to hurt less. The woman was able to get a part-time job. After many years, she was given disability. Many years passed and Sabrina knew nothing about her daughter. There were rumors that she was going to marry a local rich man. Chloe taught her granddaughter. "Paula, your job is to marry a wealthy man," Chloe said. "You have a beautiful figure, not to mention your face. So don't even think of getting involved with some simpleton, or you'll end up the same way as your mother." They worked out a plan together, found the most enviable grooms of the city, and began to act. Chloe pretended to be an intellectual. She wore a hat with a veil, pretended she had taste. Unfortunately, it looked ridiculous from the outside. But the woman was so sure of herself. So they chose Lucas Brown as their victim. Chloe didn't mind that the guy was a bit of a ladies' man. "The main thing is to get him in your net," she taught her granddaughter. "And then he will forget about all his women and will belong only to you." Did the woman believe what she said? It was hard to say. From the outside, it looked more like she was just playing Paula. She liked to control the girl, and she had never realized that all her life she had been fulfilling the whims of an inadequate man. "Grandma, he asked me out on a date." Paula came running home one day. "I think I've got Lucas on the hook now." "You just show him that you have dignity." Chloe was delighted with the news. Act gradually in such situations, never cut from the shoulder. Luck turned in their direction, and Lucas officially announced that his girlfriend was Paula. The girl tried her best not to slap her face in the dirt. Her efforts were not in vain, and Lucas set a wedding day. "Finally, now we will live." Chloe rejoiced. "Paula, I want a big house with servants," dreamed the woman. "Must be sure to travel abroad, expensive clothes and food." "Grandma, you will have all this," laughed the student. There was not long to wait. The wedding progressed pompously. Paula and Lucas spent their honeymoon in Bali. The girl was so happy. She now and then called her grandmother Chloe and told about how she now lives. But after returning home, everything changed dramatically. First, Lucas started disappearing during the day. Then his absence shifted to the evening, and after a year he didn't spend the night at home. "Lucas," Paula sobbed, "you don't love me at all. You have someone else again." "Darling," he laughed, "but don't sing to me about love. Did you marry me for love? Let me live my life, and I promise I won't touch you." But Paula couldn't. At first, she and her grandmother were afraid of losing such wealth. Her scandals led to the fact that Lucas began to cut her money. The girl did not understand his actions and continued to insist on her own. It ended up that one day Lucas put divorce papers on the table. "I think you realize that now you will leave here with nothing," he said sternly. "Don't even think about suing me, Paula. I'll run you over." And the girl went back to her grandmother. Her granddaughter really bought her a house not so big, which she dreamed of, but still. Chloe also hired 2 servants. "Paula, what are you doing?" she said in shock when she learned that Lucas had divorced her granddaughter. "How are we going to live now?" "Well, we have your house," objected her granddaughter. "So we'll figure something out." This was not in Chloe's plans. And from that moment, the woman began to evict her granddaughter from her house in all sorts of clever ways. "Paula, he's such a good man," advised her grandmother to her granddaughter one man. "He does not smoke and does not drink. He has a flat. So you'll have a place to live. He'll work, and you'll stay at home." "Grandma, he's old," the girl was indignant. "He's 45, and I'm 27. "Well, and nothing," insisted Chloe. "The main thing is that he should provide for you," continued the pressure Camila for several years, and Grandma Paula still managed to persuade her to marry an honorable man. "Well, that's good," Camilla sighed with relief. "I'm finally rid of her. She's going to live in my house. She must have forgotten who is the head and who is the neck. I'll never do anything to my own detriment." And that's where Paula's luck ran out. The man turned out to be a drinker. She put up with him for a few months and went back to her grandmother's house. "You know, Paula, I'm sick of you and your problems." She did not let her granddaughter into her house. "But where am I going, Grandma?" "I'm pregnant." I'm 4 months along and nobody wants to abort me. Did I sleep with that man? Chloe was screaming at the top of her voice. You're the one who started this whole mess. You're the one who has to clean it up. All right, then I'll show the documents for the purchase of your house and the police, and at least get my share of it. At the most, you'll be thrown out of here, Paula threatened. The woman was frightened by her words and let Paula into the house. From that moment, she tried to get rid of the girl. Paula, who will take care of your children. Chloe once told her, "You're having twins. I can't do it. I can't even count on your mom." "So give them straight to the orphanage," said Chloe unequivocally. "As in the orphanage?" The girl shuddered. "Are you suggesting me to give up my children? And who will feed you and them?" Chloe looked at her sternly. "I don't know," Paula answered with annoyance in her voice. "But it doesn't mean that I have to give them to an orphanage. Do you realize how shameful that would be?" "And you make sure that no one finds out about it," the woman said slyly. "How?" Paula was surprised. "Everyone here has seen me with a huge belly. And do I tell you about Italy?" Chloe smiled. "There are so many women who find their happiness abroad. I've already found a suitable candidate for you." Chloe jumped up and brought some photo. She showed it to her granddaughter, Paula. "Here you go, Peter." She pointed her finger at the stranger in the photo. "He lives on a farm in Italy. He's a wealthy man. He has vineyards, citrus orchards. How can I go to him by myself?" The girl wouldn't stop. "They won't just let me go to Italy." "Well, for that, there is a marriage bureau," said the grandmother instructively. "I've already learnt everything. I gave your photograph of you in your 20s. You look very pretty there. The agent helped me write a letter 3 days ago," he replied. "That's it, the job is done. Peter is waiting for you." Paula couldn't come to her senses. She had heard, of course, that this was the way to get married nowadays. But not knowing the man at all, the girl could not imagine how one could marry him. "And don't forget," Chloe said sternly, "you have no children, otherwise you will spoil everything. He agreed to marry you only because you don't have children. He wants you to give him children yourself." "So I have to leave my sons in America?" said the girl in shock. "But I can't." "You can," the woman ordered. "Otherwise you will be left on the street together with them. I won't feed you anymore." Paula could not recover from her conversation with Chloe for a long time. She was tormented by vague doubts. But on the other hand, she realized that she had nowhere to go with these children. She had never worked, she had no money. "Maybe I should leave them to their mother," she pondered. "But the mother can barely walk. She'll give them to the orphanage or they'll take them away from her. Has she been given a disability? No, that option won't work." For days, Paula couldn't decide what to do with the children. The girl was already doing the paperwork for Italy. What if it flashed across her mind, I should definitely leave them to their father. Her mother had said his name was Christian Thompson. No, I can't leave the children to him directly, Paula thought. We'll have to do something clever. I'll first find out where he lives now, and then I'll think of something. One of Paula's old acquaintances worked for the police. He found her information about the children's father. Los Angeles, then? The girl wondered. So I'm due next week. After that, I'll pick up the kids and go there. Maybe I should leave them outside the church with a note. I'll see what they have there. Wow, so many cathedrals and churches. There's even a convent. That's right, a convent. Paula shouted with joy. I'll leave the children there. When Paula boarded the plane, her visa to Italy was already ready. The girl flew to Los Angeles with anticipation. But as soon as she arrived at the convent, there was such a heaviness in her heart that Paula began to doubt her plans. Lord, how am I going to leave them to a complete stranger? She sobbed as she looked at the babies. Maybe he is an alcoholic or some lying invalid. The girl stayed in the hotel for several days. She still did not dare to leave the children yet. She spoke to the Mother Superior several times. Of course, she did not tell what had really happened. I have a few days left, Paula reasoned. I have to make up my mind about something, after all. Paula, don't even think about it. Grandma Chloe shouted into the phone. Over my dead body. If you leave them, not only will I not recognize them, but I'll disown you too. Don't ever count on me again. Even if you become a bum, I'll pass you by and never throw you a ruble. God, I can't understand anything. Christian wailed, clutching his head. I've never had anyone but Madison. How is that even possible? He looked at the DNA test results for the umpteenth time. The man couldn't come to his senses all evening. He tried to find some reasonable explanation for it, but he was having no luck. It was almost 3 a.m. when he finally went to bed. This time Christian dreamt about the train again. Christian, I love you. Don't go, it was ringing in his ears as the man woke up. Christian sat up abruptly on the bed. The clock read 6:30 in the morning. The man stared at one point on the floor and sat like that for a long time. It can't be. It struck him suddenly. Could it be that one time she had got pregnant? God, he'd never been with anyone else but her. Christian stood up quickly and paced the room. His thoughts drifted to where he had forbidden them to go for so many years. Does it turn out that Sabrina had a daughter by me? He said aloud. But then why didn't our daughter leave the children to her? Maybe. Heavy thoughts tore at his heart. No, not that. Sabrina, was she really dead? He covered his face with his hands and sobbed. I've been running away from my happiness for so many years. But she was waiting for me. I could always feel it. So Sabrina is dead. The thought struck Christian so hard that he couldn't get out of bed that day. I have nothing to live for now, he said to himself. If Sabrina is gone, I am no longer needed here. He lay like that until the evening. Suddenly his phone rang. It was the Mother Superior. Did you get the results of the DNA test? She asked quickly. We need to deal with the issue of the children urgently. Yes, the man replied briefly in a low voice. They are actually my grandchildren. It's an old story from my college days. What have you decided? The nun continued the conversation. Will you keep the boys? I don't know, Christian was confused. Can I think about it for a while, please? All right, do you have until tomorrow? Agreed the woman. I'm sorry, but we can't wait any longer. The children have been staying with us illegally for a whole week. Christian came to his senses. He had some strength in him. The man made himself some hot tea and began to think hard. Okay, I can hire a nanny. So if they don't sleep well at night, I'll at least try to get some sleep during the day, Christian reasoned. I'll get someone from the child welfare office to teach me how to bathe them, feed them porridge, and take them for walks. I'll take them for walks myself. There won't be any problems here, as I won't be able to work now. The state has to pay me some kind of allowance for my children, so I'll have some money. The more Christian thought about the fact that he would keep the children, the more joy appeared in his heart. It's settled, the man finally said, and looked at his watch. The big hand showed noon. The boys will stay with me tomorrow. After the convent, I'll go straight to work and write a letter of resignation. I have so much paperwork to do now. The main thing is that I have my own place and $30,000 in my account. I hope they'll agree to give me the kids. At 9 a.m., Christian spoke to the Mother Superior. I think my daughter's mother is dead, he said with annoyance in his voice. Otherwise, she would have left the children to her. Christian, don't jump to conclusions. The woman looked at him lovingly. I see that woman was dear to you. Yes, he wept. She was the only person I ever loved. I'm sorry I can't contain my emotions. That's why I'm telling you not to jump to conclusions, she advised the guest. Go to the police, they will give you that information. Christian lovingly took the children in his arms. The boys were not frightened of him. After he agreed, the Mother Superior called the guardianship authorities to the convent, so that on the same day they began to register the children with Christian. Christian, you've got to be kidding, Nicholas said in shock. Are you serious? You became a father of 2 little children? Not a father, but a grandfather, Christian corrected Nicholas. Do you think it's so easy to give these little ones to an orphanage? And besides, I can see now that my life has not been in vain. In fact, it was much more complicated than the man had realized. But he didn't give up. The boys woke up at night, one or the other, crying all the time. Christian learned to sleep anywhere and under any circumstances. He even managed to lie down in the intervals when he dipped his spoon into the soup. The care authorities provided a free nanny, nappies, formula, milk, and porridge for the first time. That seems to be everything in that department. Christian checked his list again. On his way home, the man also stopped at a pharmacy. He picked up all sorts of baby hygiene products. The man was so absorbed in his worries that he even forgot that he had made a request to the police. Christian Thompson. There was an unfamiliar voice. It's about your inquiry about Sabrina Smith. The woman is alive and living in Chicago. Will you come to the police station or shall I give you her address? His heart was racing. He hadn't even expected this good news. Dictate the address, Christian answered quickly. He wrote down the address he wanted on a piece of paper, thanked the policeman, and hung up. So Sabrina is alive, he rejoiced. Immediately he was struck with horror. What if she's married? Maybe she gave her daughter to an orphanage. Maybe she never thought of me at all. Once again, Christian was moping. The man didn't know what to do. There was only one reasonable solution: to go to Chicago and meet Sabrina, but he was insanely afraid of that. What will I tell her, he thought. Sabrina, I'm sorry, I'm the very last creature. I didn't tell you then that I already had a fiancée. She won't even listen to me. She'll just close the door in front of me. Christian went crazy for a few days. The only thing that saved him then was his children. He completely immersed himself in taking care of them and forgot about Sabrina for a while, or rather what he was going to do with her now. Here they are, my dear little ones. He carefully placed his grandson on the towel after bathing. Let's wipe our feet. Let's wipe our hands. Let's not forget about the face, Christian said lovingly. Sabrina looked tiredly out the window. It was getting close to Christmas. She had grown used to her loneliness, but still, from time to time, the mental wounds made themselves felt. God, I'm almost 55 and I've never had a life, she sighed. I've failed as a wife and a mother. Sabrina burst into tears. That's why nobody needs me in my old age, the woman sobbed. She took her crutch and went to her wardrobe and pulled out warm clothes. The first snow was already falling outside. After about 30 minutes, Sabrina cautiously made her way down to the yard. Despite the white blankets, it wasn't cold outside. The woman slowly wandered towards a small public garden. She sat down on a bench and closed her eyes. The cool air burned her nostrils. Ba. A baby's voice was heard, and the woman opened her eyes sharply. Standing beside her was a 1.5-year-old child. His mum stood behind him. The baby stomped his little feet and babbled something to his mum. Turning to the young woman, he pointed at Sabrina. Ba. Sabrina's heart warmed. The baby was so funny that she immediately remembered her daughter. She thought it was Paula standing by the bench. Hello, little one. The woman couldn't help herself. Aren't you cold for a walk today? The baby tried to climb into her arms. Ba, he kept repeating. Let's go home, laughed his mum. Your BA is sitting at home. You can't take her outside in this weather. Sabrina looked tenderly at the boy. His mum took the boy in her arms, and he waved all the way to the pram. And Sabrina waved back at him. How funny you two are. At this age, you don't know who you're going to grow up to be. That's why everything is so simple and easy. That's how my Paula used to beg for my arms and call me Mum. And now I don't even know where she is. And tears flowed from Sabrina's eyes. She felt uneasy and got up from the bench. She wanted to walk forward some more, but she wanted to be alone so badly that Sabrina went straight home. She took out old pictures of her daughter, and for a long time she couldn't calm down. Paula, my daughter, she touched the pictures tenderly. How beautiful you are here. I love you so much. That day Sabrina did not do well. First she ate soup, then her can broke. Then there was a knock on her door. Someone had the wrong flat. What's the matter? The woman was cursing. I'm sweating today, so no mood. And then there's all this. Sabrina decided not to do anything else today. She lay down on the sofa and turned on the TV. but thoughts of the past kept her busy that day. In front of Sabrina's eyes was Christian's face. I wonder how his fate turned out, she thought. He probably has a family a long time ago and is happy. Christian once said that he wanted many children, at least 2. He definitely has 1 daughter, and his wife probably has several children. I'd like to see him. He must have changed a lot. And there's not much of the old Sabrina left. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman was immersed in memories of the Institute. She had seen Christian writing his diploma with her, and then defending it so brilliantly. Well done, guys. Shook their hands. That's the bar you have to set. That's the only kind that makes real specialists. Yes, sighed the woman. Everything did not turn out as I would have liked it. I remained a nobody. I hope that at least Christian's life has worked out. It was still nice outside the window, and Sabrina turned off the television. She was getting annoyed with the extraneous sounds, so she turned off the light and just lay there with her eyes open. She felt light at heart, to her surprise. The tears had washed away some of the sadness and sorrow, and the sun showed behind the dark clouds. No one knows what I'm doing all this for, she thought. Maybe it's all for the best. That's how we complain about fate. And then time passes and it becomes clear that it was better for everyone. That's how I cling to Christian and my daughter. I should have let them go a long time ago. Maybe one of them would have come back to me one day. Such a simple thought struck the woman so hard that she thought about it for a long time. Sabrina didn't notice how the evening ended and night fell. The woman woke up when it was 2 on the clock. Wow, she smiled. I don't remember such a bright state of mind. It's like the sun is burning in the middle of my chest. She rejoiced. How I wish I could fall asleep in this state tonight and feel the same tomorrow morning. There is such clarity in my head and peace inside. Sabrina awoke to someone ringing her doorbell for a long time. She jumped up abruptly. It was already 10. She went to the door and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing in front of the door. "Who do you want?" Without opening the door, she asked. "Who do you want?" repeated the woman. "I'm looking for Sabrina." The woman heard the voice and turned pale. The voice sounded familiar to her. She also knew that it was very rare that anyone would call her that. A click was heard and the door opened. Sabrina eyed the intruder with interest. After a few moments, her breath caught. "Well, hello, Sabrina," the man said in a trembling voice. "I'm sorry to drop in you unannounced. We could have a word with you." The woman hesitantly opened the door to the flat and only now noticed the portable pram. The guest picked it up and entered. Sabrina couldn't say a word out of shock. Her legs were shaking, and she sat down on a chair. "What is it, Christian?" she finally said, looking at the cradle. "It's a long story," the man tried to smile. "We could put the children on the bed for the time being, because they had already had a rough flight." A baby cried. A second one cried after him. Sabrina pulled the boy out with trembling hands and put him on the couch. Christian took the nappies out of a large bag and, like a true professional, changed them for the children in seconds. "We haven't eaten anything since this morning," the man said carefully. "We'd better make some porridge." Sabrina watched what was happening and could not believe her eyes. She was so amazed that she couldn't even find the words. Christian was in the kitchen. He quickly prepared the baby's food and put the bottles to cool. Then he sat down on a chair and looked intently at the hostess. "Sabrina, are these our grandchildren?" he said calmly. "Our daughter gave them to me." Sabrina couldn't believe it. "Paula, did you have her?" "No. She left the twins at the convent. She put a note in the basket for the nuns to find me," he said, trying to hold back tears. "Sabrina, I adopted our boys." Finally, the woman couldn't take it anymore and cried loudly. Christian soothed her. "Christian, how can you do this?" she said through her tears. "How could Paula do such a thing?" "I don't know," Christian answered briefly. "Sabrina, I'm sorry." The man couldn't bear it and cried. "I acted like a bastard. I didn't tell you that I had a fiancé at home. I took advantage of the opportunity that day. I didn't want to marry Madison. You were the only one I ever loved, but my dad made me do it. I'm so sorry. But why didn't you tell me about it then? The woman sobbed even more. I've waited all my life for you. For many years I had forbidden myself to think about you, Christian confessed honestly. But after my wife died many years ago, I was afraid that you had a family and that you were happy. God, how stupid we are. Sabrina got up from her chair and walked over to Christian. We've wasted so many years, Sabrina exclaimed. No, he hugged her. We're just getting started. Let's go feed our children. The woman took one bottle and put one baby in her arms. The boy gobbled greedily. Sabrina watched the baby, and with each passing minute her heart filled with love for him. She furtively looked at Christian. The man was so happy, he was just glowing. This is what I had to go through all the trouble for, the woman thought, wiping away her tears with one hand. Nothing happens for nothing. Everything that happens to us has meaning. Christian looked at Sabrina lovingly. He had been so dreading this meeting, but it had happened so unexpectedly that he just couldn't believe it all. The man and woman never doubted that this was the best day of their lives. The boys ate and fell fast asleep. Sabrina and Christian went into the kitchen. They had a lot to talk about. They were starting a new phase of their lives and had a lot of issues to deal with. Thank you for being able to understand and forgive me tonight, Christian said to her. Daddy. Mummy. There were voices in the yard. Where are you? Are you in the garden? Martin, Jasper, we're here. Waved his hands at an old man near an old cherry tree. The brothers went into the garden. On the way they discussed something animatedly. Finally they saw their parents. Well, can I congratulate you? Asked the mother. How was the defense? Martin and Jasper studied in New York. After graduating from school in Chicago, their teachers advised Christian that his son should go to university in New York. Both boys had simply amazing abilities. Martin studied to be a computer programmer and Jasper, in contrast, became an art historian. But the brothers weren't confused by their different majors. They always had something to talk about. After Christian came to Sabrina, they decided to stay in Chicago. The man was fine with that. He sold his flat in Los Angeles, and he and Sabrina were able to buy a large, well-appointed house with a large garden. At first, they tried to have the boys call them grandparents. But when they were 8 years old, Martin declared that Sabrina and Christian were parents to them. From that point on, they never had any questions about it. Having had a negative experience with Paula, Sabrina was initially very afraid that her sons would grow up and abandon them. But the boys didn't just grow up grateful. They loved their parents wholeheartedly. We are very grateful to you for investing so much in us, the sons often said. And most of all, thank you for finding the strength and not giving us to the orphanage. The boys came home for a few weeks. They both had jobs in New York and good prospects. Martin, Jasper, their father, told them one day, "Your mother and I don't mind if you choose to stay in New York. You are adults and should decide for yourselves what you want to be and where you want to live." Christian and Sabrina looked fondly at their sons. Their parents had arranged a dinner party for them in honor of their diploma. Of course, both realized that they were old. Both of them were to turn 78 this year. Now I can leave in peace, Christian thought. My life hasn't gone to waste. I thank God that one day 2 nuns knocked on my door. Well, are you going or not? Alex Johnson rushed the family. Why should I go there? Jennifer grumbled unhappily, trying not to let her husband to be here and explain the necessity of the trip again. They were going to the cemetery to check on Alex Johnson's first wife, who had died a few months ago. Today would have been her birthday. Alex likes to show off, Jennifer thought. It seems necessary, but who needs it? Not me anyway. I need a legal marriage with him, not a walk through cemeteries with this kid who's nobody to me. 7-year-old Danny was Alex's adopted son. With his first wife, Emily Anderson, he'd been married for 10 years, but they'd had no children. At first it bothered, then it was as if they reconciled, and then Emily insisted on adoption. Alex resisted, but she insisted. He was glad that he'd been able to take Danny as a 3-year-old instead of a newborn. Emily was thrilled at first. But then it passed. Alex Johnson didn't want a child from the beginning, only pretended to be a happy father. And then the baby was left to fend for itself. Then his wife got sick, had tests, and then she died. And immediately there was a beautiful Jennifer, who was on the catch even during Emily's life, only lurking. Now she doesn't have to hide. He even dragged her to the cemetery to show her sorrow at the grave of her beloved. What does a new lover and a baby have to do with it? Just for show. What kind of man is that? Jennifer thought with annoyance, but did not dare to interfere. Too long to achieve a fiancé. A rich businessman who loves her and spoils her. The only disadvantage, a child and these trips to the cemetery in threes. But why? Okay, it's not that often, Jennifer thought. Once in a while you can be patient. Already in the car, Alex began to explain. You have to, Jennifer. And the child needs to communicate with the deceased. You remember Mom, don't you? I remember. The boy frowned. He remembered, but not well, because his mother was sick and not before him. Now he has a father, a healthy one, but he's not much use to his son either. And then there's Aunt Jennifer, who doesn't care about him either. Daddy once said that soon she will be my mother, and she will be sick too, asked the boy, who associated the word mother with hospitals and the smell of medicine. But for some reason his father got angry, thinking that Danny was talking about his real mom. The boy obediently shut up, not understanding how this aunt would suddenly become a mom. But if Dad needed to, he could go to the cemetery. He even liked the cemetery. Good weather. Morning, everything was green and blooming. Not many people. We approached a grave. Hi, I'm sorry we're all together, but where you are now is probably already known, his father said, pushing Danny to say hello. Hello, Mom, the son said obediently, looking at the photo of a young Emily Anderson. Alex Johnson began to set the table to put out appetizers and cognac. Here we are, more to drink. And how are we going to drive back? Jennifer said unhappily. All right, by cab. What's there to drink? Dad objected. Danny realized that he was the only one here. The grown-ups would go about their business. They handed him a candy and began to remember the deceased. But soon the wake turned into a picnic. The place is quiet, the weather is fine, the birds are singing, and the crosses and monuments all around, well, people die. Engrossed in investigating the monuments, Danny forgot who he came here with and why. He looked at the portraits, read the inscriptions, and suddenly realized that his father and Aunt Jennifer were not around. At first he wasn't frightened. The cemetery didn't seem big. He thought he would go to his relatives, but everything around him was unfamiliar. He did not dare to shout and call his father, knowing that in a cemetery one should behave quietly. An elderly woman came out from behind a bush. Grandma, help me, I'm lost, Danny almost cried, but held back, knowing that men don't cry. How did you manage? Did you come here alone? The woman smiled affectionately. No, with my dad and Aunt Jennifer. They're remembering my mom at her grave. Oh, you poor thing, you miss your mommy. Come on, let's go look for her. Danny, do you remember which way you came in? Okay, let me put it another way. You walked from the gate straight down the path to the grave. Danny explained as best he could how they walked, how many times they turned around, and it became clear to Grandma which way to look for the right grave. Soon they heard voices. The father and his mistress also grabbed the boy and argued noisily, finding out who was to blame for his disappearance. Couldn't look after the child. Alex Johnson shouted, I'm not your babysitter. There was no reason to take him, Jennifer replied. Danny realized they were going to jump him, so he grabbed the arm of the grandmother he'd gotten to know. She said her name was Barbara Paulina, and you can call me Baba Barbie. Are these yours? She asked, surprised but wary when she heard the voices. As she approached the grave and saw the monument, she pressed her hand to her lips and whispered. Daughter Danny and Jennifer stared at their grandmother, perplexed. Alex Johnson became visibly nervous. Where are you from? Barbara Paulina is here, he said. So you've killed Emily. She didn't tell me anything about herself or that I had a grandson. What kind of man are you, Alex? Barbara Paulina was once Alex Johnson's mother-in-law, mother of his wife Emily. True, her son-in-law had only seen her a few times in all the years of their marriage, and all encounters had been unfriendly. Barbara Paulina seriously quarreled with her daughter when she decided to marry this passerby. That's what she called her son-in-law. And Emily herself did not want to meet and communicate with her mother, ashamed of close kinship with a simple village woman. After all, Emily immediately after school went to the city, graduated from the institute, became an elegant city lady, and suddenly she was a mom. Emily was a late daughter, and her mother always looked older than her years. It was embarrassing to show her to people. Barbara Paulina felt it, resented her daughter for not inviting her mother and visiting her. What could be done? That's how they separated. Barbara knew nothing about her daughter and called her son-in-law a philanderer because she knew the man. He's rich, but are honest people like that, she thought. Hearing the accusations, Alex Johnson flared up. Watch your language, Barbara Paulina. What do you mean, mortified? Emily died of her own illness. I had nothing to do with it at all. I did everything I could to make her well. Yes, I see. I see your everything, cried grandmother bitterly. My wife's grave is not yet cold, and you are already drinking on it with some girl, and you are not ashamed of your child. You are not afraid of God. How could I not, if you've been walking away from her all your life without hiding? Because of your nervousness and hysterics, she died, poor thing. Why didn't you tell me? You knew her address, didn't let me say goodbye to my daughter. Oh, what grief, mocked former son-in-law. But you yourself for so many years did not want to know her, and now you're saying that I killed her. You raised her sick. She couldn't give birth. She died before her time. So it's my fault. Who else could it be? Was she healthy and happy when she lived with me? Then why did she run away from you like a plague? And how come she couldn't give birth? And who's that? Barbara Paulina pointed to the boy. That's not her. He's adopted. Emily couldn't. Why do you say such things in front of the child? The grandmother was horrified. Or else don't go near the child, you witch. You have nothing to do with him at all, growled the father. Danny listened to the argument, shifting his gaze from his father to his grandmother. Drunken Aunt Jennifer giggled nearby, not really taking in the meaning of the conversation. The boy had always known he was adopted and wasn't particularly upset about it. It wasn't like he didn't know what it was like to live with his own family, his mother and father. And this way he at least had an explanation for why his life at home wasn't very good. And this Grandma Barbara, she just clicked with him right away. And it was a shame that Daddy was fighting with her. It would be nice if they could make up and Grandma could live with them. But they wouldn't make up. They argued and blamed each other more and more vehemently. As a result, Barbara Paulina again called her father a scoundrel, and a scoundrel hugged the boy, kissed him on the cheek and left. Still in tears, Danny looked sadly at her and almost cried himself. Would they never see each other again? Jennifer's parents began to pack up, too. Alex Johnson grumbled angrily. Where the hell had that old witch come from? Still, he was telling Danny off. Where's he been? I said around if he's wandering around the cemetery. What is this? A park or something? What are you sitting on? And then it was Jennifer, who didn't want to clean up, explaining that she'd had a bad day. Finally, we packed up, drove home. On the way home, Danny tried to find out something from Daddy, his Grandma Barbara Mommy's mom. Is she still coming to visit us? Apparently she's old. That's who. And I really hope she doesn't. I don't want to see her again, Alex Johnson said, and Danny became sad. Barbara Paulina, who was in the cemetery that day, accidentally visited the grave of an old acquaintance who had gone to the city with her children. She returned to her village, where she had worked all her life as a milkmaid. However, this was not her main occupation, and she was known far beyond her native land as a healer. No, she was neither a sorceress nor a psychic. She just knew nature well, knew herbs and knew how to prepare them. She was also familiar with some other methods of folk medicine, and all the residents of the neighborhood knew that with their ailments should go not to doctors, but to Grandmother Barbara, who had already saved many people from great misfortunes. When she returned home, she thought about how she could save herself from loneliness, and her grandson by lineage from the bad influence of her adoptive father. She blamed herself for not seeing her only daughter for so long. She hadn't helped her when she'd gotten sick. But what could she do if Emily had really run away from her, didn't want to communicate, and now she was gone? She didn't have any kids either. But this little foster kid, oh, I should take him. I should have asked Alex he would have. What's a foster kid got to do with it? Except he's already got a new girl. Maybe she'll have her own. He's a good kid. He doesn't belong with such people, thought Grandmother, and pondered, decided once again to go to the city to see her former son-in-law. And if he doesn't agree, I already know how to influence him. She thought. When she got to town and met Alex Johnson, she began to lay out her arguments to him and ask him to give Danny back. Alex, but think to yourself, why would you want him? You're young, healthy, you've got a new fiancée. What's her name? Jennifer. But she'll give you more than one child. And what do you need someone else's child for? Not forever, anyway. Please, I'm old. Maybe I'll die soon, but you can have him on the papers. He'll be yours. In the meantime, let him stay with me, lonely as I am. In fact, Alex, why don't you send him to the country? Jennifer agreed. There's fresh air there, after all. It's the beginning of summer. It'll be good for the baby, but Alex Johnson was adamant. That's all I need. I'm not going to give anyone away. My son is mine by all accounts. And I need him. And I'm asking you, apparently old, to go home. You live alone and live as you like. It's a stranger, completely. No matter how much Barbara Paulina begged, her former son-in-law disagreed and eventually kicked her out of the house. Jennifer didn't understand this, tried to argue. But here's the wrong thing to say, dear. Grandma's right. Let the child stay with her. Shut up with your advice if you don't understand anything. You don't know when you'll have another one, or if you'll have one. But I already have this one, and I need him for status and reputation. I am now, as you can see, a perfect family man in the eyes of society. I'm not abandoning my adopted son. I'm raising him as my own. He's a big boy. He's already handsome. And we look like a normal family. So I'm not giving him up, and I'm not going to give him up, no matter what you say. Barbara Paulina left their home upset, but she still had hope of getting her way. Some time ago, using her methods, she had cured a very high-ranking official, literally saved him from certain death, categorically refusing money. She didn't take any money at all for the treatment, but this man was truly grateful to the healer and promised her all possible help. Here's my address and phone number, Barbara Paulina, and if you have any difficulty, you can come to me at once. I have the means. I'll help you if you need it. You help me. I'll help you, and don't say no. It's a sin to refuse. If a person offers help from the heart, at that moment she didn't need anything, which she told the official, but she took the phone number and address out of politeness, and so it happened. She didn't know her former son-in-law's capabilities, but she really hoped the official could still do more than Alex Johnson and help her get her grandson. She called the patron, explained the problem, and the man promised to help. He didn't fool Alex Johnson. The one knew him perfectly well and found ways to influence the situation. So soon, Barbara Paulina happily returned to the village with her grandson. Danny was happy too. He was fed up with life with his father and his fiancée. He hoped it would be much more interesting with his grandmother, and he was right. In his grandmother's house, he not only got rid of the eternal scolding and reproaches of his father and his mistress, but also got acquainted with a completely new world, the village. Grandmother turned out to be kind and clever, taught him the wisdom of village life. It was perhaps more difficult than in the city, but much more interesting. Together they went to the forest, collected herbs, berries, which could save people from diseases. "Grandma, how do you know all this?" wondered the boy. "So from time immemorial I know," smiled Barbara Paulina. "My grandmother taught me when I was like you. Now I'm teaching you. And you memorize, it will always come in handy." One day, walking through the forest, they saw 3 puppies squeaking pitifully in the grass. "Oh, Grandma, someone left them here. Shall we take them away?" "No, they won't grow up to be dogs. They're wolf cubs. We won't abandon them, of course, but we can't take them home. If people see them, they'll be scared. We'll make a nest for them here. We'll go every day to feed them. You will have your own wolves who will love you and protect you." And so they did. And soon the wolves became quite tame, at least for grandmother and grandson. "But for strangers, they can be dangerous," said Barbara Paulina. "And wolves won't live in a house. For them, home is the woods." In short, Danny felt truly happy for the first time in his life and hoped it would always be that way. His foster father, however, did not think of giving up so easily. Yes, his ex-mother-in-law's patron had put him on such terms that he had to give the boy up, and actually didn't miss Danny very much without him. But he was insulted to the core and hoped to prove it someday. And who's in charge in this life? But things didn't happen at all the way he'd planned. That is, without his involvement. He rejoiced, believing that fate itself had sided with him. Barbara Paulina had fallen ill, and not just ill, but had had a stroke. No wonder her age was more than old, because she gave birth to a daughter already not young, and here in her old age and still such a shock, learned of Emily's death. Before that she had hoped to reconcile with her daughter, then she fought for her grandson. She thought that taking care of him would give her strength and perhaps allow her to live longer. But it didn't. She could not help herself. She had no strength to stand up. Her arms and legs were gone, and she was almost speechless. The frightened boy rushed to the neighbors for help, and they of course did not leave them with his grandmother. But someone in good faith reported the incident to Alex Johnson. He instantly arrived, building himself a worried and concerned relative. But to take care of the former mother-in-law, understandably, was not going to. His involvement in Barbara Paulina's life was limited to the fact that he got her admitted to a hospice, and Danny took her home. "What's going to happen to Grandma now? Won't she die?" Danny worried. "I don't know," replied his father. "She was in the hospital, and she's there now. Maybe they'll cure her." Waved the father away. "I hope nothing like that happens. And we'll visit her." The son remembered that they went to the hospital for nothing. "If she gets better, she'll come back. And then you'll give me back. I liked it in the village, no, but I don't know what you could have liked there. But what's life in this wilderness with some old woman? What are you, Mowgli or something? In the city you have to live in a civilized society. Learn, get used to communicating with people. You have lived in this village only a little while, and you have already turned into some kind of savage. I don't want such a son. And if that's the case, then give me back to my grandmother, and I'll be her grandson," Danny argued. But his father paid no attention to him. He realized that in any case neither Danny nor Barbara Paulina would be able to return. He bought a certificate that her house was in a state of disrepair and posed a threat to the neighbors, eventually arranged for it to be demolished. This was very considerate as it made Alex Johnson the master of the situation. Jennifer was not at all happy about the baby's return. She was fine in a rich house without this nuisance, quite content with no longer having to pose as the boy's loving stepmother. "Well, what did you bring him for?" she asked grudgingly. After all, they were living so well. What to do with him now? The boy is growing up, he will start hooliganizing, he will go to school. Friends will appear, and with lessons it will be necessary to help. And what are you doing? You're sitting at home anyway, doing nothing, so I'll have to babysit. He doesn't like me and doesn't listen to me. And then why don't I do anything? I don't have time to take care of this child at all. Beauty salons, fitness massage. You don't want me to turn into a fat and boring housewife, do you, or are you being cranky in your robe, Jenny? Alex said understandingly. I see. I can't expect that from you. Okay, we'll hire a babysitter. He promised and immediately started looking for one. Soon Daisy showed up at the house. A young provincial girl, but with a teacher's education. Jennifer was worried at first. A stranger in the house is her potential competition. Who knows what Alex would think? But when she saw Daisy, she calmed down. The girl was not even a gray mouse, but some microorganism of small stature compared to her so unattractive and ungroomed. Skinny, her clothes hung hopelessly on her. Colorless, liquid hair, short, neatly cut. I don't see how anyone can let themselves get so neglected, Jennifer thought squeamishly. It's even better for me, though. I'm sure he won't be interested in one of these. Let him do the unpleasant chores of taking care of the boy. I'm thankful for that. Danny, on the other hand, didn't like his new nanny. She was a kind, cheerful girl. And it turned out they had a lot of things to talk about. Daisy had grown up in the countryside, too, and she had fond memories of it. She talked happily about her childhood, and Danny shared memories of his short time in the countryside. He told about the wolf cubs, too. Worrying about them now. I mean, they're used to us coming in with Grandma. How are they alone now? What if the hunters come upon them pale? The boy said. Daisy tried to reassure him. Don't be afraid. Wolves are wild, very intelligent animals. They have to live in the forest. And hunters will always manage to hide. And she told everything she knew about wolves. So don't be sad, they'll be fine. Yeah, it's not them I'm worried about anymore, it's Grandma. How's she doing in the hospital? And if she's gone, I'll be all alone. Jennifer doesn't need me at all. Especially not Danny. You saw how lonely the boy was. Fate's been cruel to him. Orphaned, probably right after he was born. Foster mom died. His father was completely indifferent to him. No stepmother to speak of. The only person close to his heart was his grandmother in the hospital. The girl already knew that Alex Johnson sent his former mother-in-law, not even to a clinic, but to a hospice, where people are not treated, but provide a quiet dying. And indeed, a stroke at her age is very serious. The woman's not likely to survive. Poor boy. He won't even be able to say goodbye to his grandmother. So the girl decided to help the child at her own risk. She found out the address of the hospice and said that someday they'd go there, but she couldn't say anything to Daddy and Jennifer too. They can't know, or they'll get mad and won't let them go. And they'll probably kick me out, she said. Danny was very happy and looked forward to going to the hospital to visit his grandmother. So one day, when his father and Jennifer were off for the day for an event, he and the girl hit the road. The hospice wasn't that close to their home, so the girl was in a hurry, realizing that if she didn't get back before her hosts returned, she would be in big trouble. But of course she didn't want that either. After all, she did not have her own place in the city, and until she got a job in this rich house, had to live in a hostel, which was not very pleasant. And the pay was decent enough, and it was a shame to leave Danny behind. Finally, they entered the room where Barbara Paulina lay motionless on the bed. Her condition had not improved, but had worsened, probably because the poor woman realized the hopelessness of her situation. It would have been naive of her to assume that her son-in-law would ever take her home, or at least let her live with him. Fortunately, she knew nothing about the demolition of her house, and therefore thought that her life was over. It was so sad that she didn't even hope to see her grandson, so she didn't try to get better. She just lay and looked at the ceiling, waiting for death. When she heard a child's voice shouting Grandma Barbara Paulina, she thought that she must have thought so. After all, she didn't expect to see and hear her grandson again. However, it was really Danny. He ran over to the bed, looked at her, always so active and now completely motionless, and burst into loud tears. Grandma, you're alive. How glad I am. I came to see you. I was afraid I would never see you again. This is the girl, my nanny. It was she who brought me here, and Papa knows nothing. And it is necessary that he should continue not to know, and will always visit you now. Grandma's left hand, which everyone thought was already motionless, suddenly rose and came down on the boy's head. Danny, I never thought I'd see you. He didn't think I'd live myself. But look, I saw you and I came alive. I thought my hands were dead a long time ago, too, but they're moving. All they had to do was touch you. How lucky I was to see you. Grandma, you'll stand up now. You'll be just like you were before, will you? You're the one who cured everyone, so you should get well. I can't do it without you. Jessica stood there wiping away her tears. The scene moved her to the core. A nurse entered and gasped in amazement. Barbara Paulina, are you better? She could not believe her eyes. Better, she replied. I think someone still needs me here. It's too early to die, of course. You're very much needed, exclaimed the nurse. I'll get the doctor right away. We need to keep you on your meds. This is my main medicine. Barbara Paulina pointed to Danny, whose other arm had begun to move. Thank you too, Jessica. Thank you for bringing your granddaughter. I wouldn't have gotten anything from that bastard, of course. He locked me in here on purpose so I could die here. Maybe it's a mercy. Otherwise, I'd have to lie at home alone. And I wouldn't have recovered there. And here I'd still be looked after. But he wouldn't let me see my grandson. We'll come as soon as we can, Jessica said. We snuck out here, but we won't leave you now. Everyone marveled at the sudden improvement in the patient's condition. She was far from fully recovered, of course, and many people didn't believe Barbara would ever walk again. But the fact that she could speak and use her hands was a great achievement. The possibilities of the brain are not known, the doctor sighed. Probably the mental shock has given her new strength. It happens, of course, but frankly, I didn't expect to see anything like this. Jessica wasn't fooled. And at the first opportunity, she and Danny began traveling to visit her grandmother at the hospice, of course, hiding everything from Alex Johnson. Jessica even warned the staff in case Alex Johnson decided to call, telling them not to tell or mention Barbara Paulina's improved health in any way. She suspected it would not please the landlord at all. The only thing she did not consider was the neighbors. Perhaps they had nothing against either the girl or her ward, and without a second thought, having stopped Alex and Jennifer in the street, began to praise them and how well they were taking care of the child. What a wonderful nanny they had found for him. Your Danny is much more fun and active with her. She's spending a lot of time with him. You're always busy, but she's always going out with him, going somewhere. That worried Alex. He didn't know where Jessica could go with the baby. Anyway, he'd never authorized her to do anything like that. She can take him anywhere she wants, Jennifer said, annoyed when she heard the conversation. But her husband did not agree with her, and in the evening decided to ask Jessica himself. Where do you take the baby? Only where I allow. The girl replied. At the zoo a few times have been, on the playground often go. But Alex Johnson noticed that Jessica was wary of his questions, tried to ask Danny, but got the same answer. They do not go anywhere, but only go to places where they are allowed. Realizing there was no way to get the truth, Alex Johnson decided to follow Jessica. Once, having said that he was leaving for the day, he got into his car, waited for Jessica and Danny to get out and get into the called cab, and followed them. Alex had already guessed that Jessica was taking the kid to see his grandmother without his permission. Now he just had to make sure of it. After walking them to the hospice, he didn't wait for them to come out, but made a scandal at home in the evening. Jessica, I know all about your self-rule. Why did you take the baby to the hospice? Alex asked. I'm sorry, Alex Johnson. Danny misses his grandmother so much, so I decided to take him to her without letting you know. I know how you feel about Barbara Paulina, but it made Danny very happy, Jessica replied, realizing it was useless to deny it. I'd kill you for that. Why take your child to that old woman who is a stranger to him, lies there like a log? I don't think it's good for my son to visit such places. Alex was indignant. You're wrong to say that, Jessica disagreed. Danny has been much more cheerful since seeing his grandmother. He cares for her a lot, and Barbara Paulina is feeling better. She's not lying like a log anymore, and she's even getting up. The doctors say seeing her grandson has been the best medicine for her. And this is how you try to heal this old witch yet? And I asked for this, Alex asked angrily. You know about our relationship, so why are you prying into domestic matters? He couldn't calm down. I'm not. But it really does make everyone feel better that Danny is visiting Nana, Jessica replied. What business is it of yours anyway? You dare to take your child where you're not asked to go and argue about it. But I'm not going to tolerate that in my house. Leave at once, and you'll get your settlement now. Danny, hearing his father's words, ran up to him. Daddy, don't. Please don't kick Jessica out. I won't feel good without her. Or are you still going to get in the way that you're going to feel bad, that you won't go to grandma's anymore? That grandmother isn't your grandmother. She's just a witch. You'll be fine without her. And if you cry, I'll lock you in your room so you won't go anywhere, Alex threatened. Jessica, swallowing her tears, gathered her things and quietly comforted Danny. Don't cry, buddy. You and I will see each other again sometime. We'll go to grandma's. I don't know how yet, but I'll think of something. Make sure you take me with you. Okay, then, the boy pleaded. I don't want to stay here. I don't feel good here. You can see that. Let's live together somewhere. That's impossible. Your dad will take you away from me anyway, and that will only make it worse. They could put me in jail for that, the nanny explained. She had to leave after all, and Danny was locked in a room. But luckily, the room was on the first floor. He saw Jessica leave through the window. He could hear his father still raging somewhere in the back of the house, berating Jennifer for not wanting to watch the baby, which was why he had to hire all kinds of con artists. Taking advantage of the noise he was making, the boy slowly opened the window, jumped out, and rushed in the same direction Jessica had gone. He caught up with her. Don't chase me away, please, Jessica. I'm not coming home anyway, and no one will know I left with you instead of running away. I'll only have enough for dinner, or maybe even later in the morning, only we can go anywhere in that time. Jennifer couldn't go anywhere in particular with Danny. She lived in a dormitory, but she didn't know if they had left a bunk for her there. And besides, she could only live there by herself. Danny couldn't be taken. Fine. They'd live somewhere else. She didn't know where, but she didn't care. She was ready to live on the street, as long as it wasn't at home, Danny begged. But of course she couldn't stay on the street. She persuaded the dormitory manager to let her stay in a small room with the boy for the time being. He agreed. But Alex Johnson wasn't so simple. Soon the whole town was plastered with pictures of Jessica and Danny. The ad said the nanny had stolen the child and was holding him by force. The commandant, of course, noticed such an ad too and became outraged. He appeared to Jessica. "What on earth are you doing? Young lady, not only have you become a criminal yourself, but you are making me look like a harborer. I don't want to go to jail. I won't report you, of course, but you must leave immediately with the child. And my advice to you is to get back to his father quickly. Then there will probably be no repercussions for you." Jessica wasn't going to take that advice. She couldn't give the boy to a father like that, and not just because Danny had begged so fervently for it. She realized for herself the child was not well in a home where he was not loved, and where already, naturally, he would never see his grandmother Barbara Paulina again. She didn't know how they would be able to visit Barbara Paulina, because they were probably already being guarded at the hospice. She didn't even know where she and Danny would go now. Not only did they have no shelter, but there was danger on all sides. Anyone could point her out as a child abductor. Trying to avoid that, she decided to get out of town, and soon she and Danny found themselves on the edge of the city. But even there, they almost got caught. Jessica and the boy were walking down the street when she suddenly spotted a police car in the distance. It didn't bode well. Trying to avoid an unwanted encounter, she popped into a convenience store. The police officers, seeing her, were already on their way to the same place. "Young lady, please," the owner addressed her. "I see you've wandered in here by mistake." He recognized her too. He had seen the ad, but he did not give her away. On the contrary, he opened the door of the back room and said, "Go in there. I'll try to get rid of them." Jessica and the child hid, and just in time. The police were already entering the store. A woman with a boy just came in. She is suspected of a crime. The child has been kidnapped. Where did they go? "Oh, really? What kidnapping?" "It was my wife and son. No one kidnapped the child." "It's our own son," he replied. "And where did they go?" "They went through the back door. It's quicker that way, to the house. I live over there on the other side of the store." The cops, realizing they had made a mistake, left, and the shopkeeper came in and addressed Jessica. "Well, there are no more cops, but you'll have to explain what the kidnapping is. For what purpose?" He said, already realizing that this was not a simple case. "Jessica didn't kidnap me. I ran away on my own," Danny blurted out. "I don't want to go home. I'd rather live on the streets." "Yes, that is indeed true," Jessica confirmed. "Jessica didn't kidnap him," the girl said tiredly. "You can turn us into the police, of course, but that won't make anyone better off." And she told her story briefly. The shopkeeper's name was Nicholas Victorson. He was impressed. "I understand now why you ran away. Stuff happens in life. You know what? Stay at my place for now. My house is small, but there's plenty of room for everyone, and then maybe we'll arrange it so that this so-called father won't have any views on you. After all, there is some way to undo the adoption, if it could be proven that the boy wasn't doing well in the adoptive parent's home. I don't know any of that yet. I don't know about legal matters, but you can ask the experts," Jessica said. "And why did you decide to help us?" she asked. "Yes, because I know what misfortune is. My wife died in a car accident a year ago. We were expecting a baby." So Nicholas waved goodbye, and Jessica actually understood him. Indeed, a man who had suffered such a tragedy might well be sympathetic to her, and Danny he didn't. The only thing Nicholas hadn't admitted was that he liked Jessica. He was even surprised, since he hadn't looked at any woman with interest since his wife's death. But this small, fragile girl had made an immediate impression for some reason. Of course, he was not going to confess his feelings at once. He didn't dare to admit it to himself. But he couldn't leave them without help, and not only because of personal sympathy. He just believed them and sympathized with them. Nicholas lived in a small cottage of his own, where he put Jessica and Danny. It wasn't safe for them to go out yet, but he had, as promised, begun to look for ways to save them from Alex Johnson, who would surely not give up his attempts to get his son back and punish his nanny. Danny and Jessica got used to their new abode fairly quickly, and the boy often talked about how much he wished his grandmother could live with them. Nicholas, having learned his grandmother's story from them, called the hospices himself, and learned that Barbara Paulina was soon to be discharged and had already recovered sufficiently, no longer terminally ill and quite capable of living on her own. That would be joyous news, and she certainly could if she had a home. But there was no home now. Which she had been told about quite by accident. She had called a neighbor to ask how things were going, and learned that the house had been torn down. Barbara Paulina was confused. Her situation was once again unenviable. Danny and Jessica never came to see her again. Alex Johnson wasn't returning her calls, and she didn't know where she would go after she was discharged. But Jessica and Nicholas found out she had to check out, and they decided to take Barbara Paulina in. Danny was overjoyed. He was happy to know that he would be near his grandmother again. They lived not quite in the country, but not quite in the city either. But Jessica was still worried that someone was looking for them, realized that eventually Alex Johnson would get his way and find them. Yeah, it wasn't hard. The boy couldn't have been in the house all the time. If he was, someone must have seen him. Eventually, Alex Johnson got word of the whereabouts of the men he was looking for. He went to the address given, but met there Not with his son, or even his babysitter, but with the shopkeeper from his former mother-in-law. We would encourage you, Alex Johnson, to drop your claim. You're not getting the boy anyway. Alex Johnson stated threateningly, "If you keep coming in here and demanding things, we'll have some information against you that will make you leave us alone." Barbara Paulina backed him up. "Yes, Alex, we've already talked to the lawyers. You demolished my house illegally. It's already known. I'm not going to report you anywhere yet, but if you show up again, leave us alone altogether. Do you need a boy? You have a young wife, Jennifer. You may have a native child soon. Why do you need all this? You have a lot more to lose if you keep insisting on what you want." Barbara saying, "We'll see about that." "I can't accept it," Alex objected. "We'll see who loses what." "Good, I'll leave you alone for now. But don't relax. Rest. Build up your strength. You'll have to fight more serious people soon." He wasn't going to turn to anyone. Alex decided to handle it himself, not leave his ex-mother-in-law, his nanny, and Danny alone. "We'll see. We'll see," he grumbled angrily to himself as he drove away from the hated house. It was clear that the first thing Nick had lost was Victor. He lost his store, burned to the ground with all the goods, and after all, it was the only source of his small but steady income. The cause of the accident was not a mystery to Nick. He realized that Alex Johnson had set the fire, but there was no way to prove it. As a result, he was left without money and with huge debts. But Nick was not going to give in to despair, decided to work and earn as he could. It's not like he was always a store owner or a salesman. He had a pretty good construction degree to support his suddenly shattered family. He went to work on a construction site and had considerable success there. But success is unreliable and construction is a dangerous place. And one day, a new misfortune befell him. He suffered a spinal injury, leaving him disabled. It was a real disaster. Barbara Paulina cried, "Oh, Nick, if I had been like I used to be, I would have lifted you up. And now what? All my medicine is left there in the house. There's nothing left at home. Yes, and there's no strength in my arms anymore. And how to live now? I can't imagine," she lamented. "What can I do? So I'll be an invalid. We'll try to survive on my pension somehow," Nick replied. Jessica started looking for a job, realizing that she would hardly earn enough to support 2 sick people and 1 growing boy. And then something happened that no one expected. Alex Johnson wasn't going to accept defeat. No, he didn't really want the baby back either. After living without the boy for a while, he'd come to appreciate the pleasures of a free life. He and Jennifer began to quarrel less, quietly could go anywhere, without thinking about who to leave Danny with. Yes, and in general, there's enough trouble from a child, even a calm and trouble-free one. So he's just a little kid, and he'll grow up and show it, Alex pondered. So let's not take him. Let him sit with his grandmother. It's your business. At least he'd be his own, Jennifer hummed in never, and he mostly agreed with her. Besides, he was afraid to get involved with the men who'd taken Danny with this Nick guy. There were no witnesses to him burning down the store. But who knows? He decided to deal with his enemies in a different way, namely to make sure they didn't get Danny, and most importantly, his ex-mother-in-law. Why would he want the boy? Alex Johnson didn't understand. But if he did, he decided to make sure Danny was taken away from her, and then let the old witch dance. He thought gloatingly. And that's what he had in mind. After all, he knew that his adopted son had relatives, so the mother died in childbirth or immediately after. The father's unknown, but the grandparents are well-to-do. The daughter was released as usual and she ran off with some man, either a biker or something else, basically a tramp with no name. Her parents looked for her, but they never found her, so they didn't see her for a long time and didn't know anything about her. Then from somewhere came the news that the daughter gave birth, died, and the boy, their grandson, in an orphanage. Started looking for a child and found only when Alex Johnson and Emily had all the documents for adoption were formalized. Emily, as soon as she heard that the child, whom she already considered her own, could be taken away, almost went crazy. Alex Johnson, then the director of the maternity hospital, paid a lot of money to keep the story quiet. They took her for their own good. I should have known it would go down like this. But I wrote down the address and all the details of those grandparents because I knew they'd come in handy. Once again, I marveled at my foresight and decided to tell these unfortunate people where their grandchild was. I had already found out who these people were through my own channels. The grandfather is such that he not only has a lot of money, but his connections are such that he knows all the ministers. The governor is his best friend. The kind of people that crazy Barbara Paulina obviously won't mess with. Neither the nanny nor the owner will even talk to them. She'll take her grandson away, and that'll be the end of it. Taking out the cherished phone number, Alex Johnson dialed it. "Dear Vyacheslav Dmitrievich, I'm sorry to bother you, but the matter is very important. As I know, you were looking for your grandson, your daughter Julia's son." He started the conversation politely. "What do you want?" The older man said in a strained voice. "You don't know me." "That's hardly important, but I do know. Don't ask me where your grandson is from. His name is Danny, by the way. Apparently some nice people adopted him after your father. But then the mother died and the child was taken away from his father. What can you prove what you say?" The elderly businessman was in no hurry to believe. "Why are you just calling to tell me this? You'll have to go after the boy yourself, take his DNA, and then everything will be clear." I don't think you'll have any trouble taking him away from some marginalized people who might be using him for their own nefarious purposes. Okay, and what do I owe you for giving me the address of his whereabouts? Vyacheslav Dmitrievich asked, suspecting that he was dealing with another swindler, but it turned out not to be so. No, not a single penny. I was forced to call you by compassion and concern for the poor boy's fate. The only thing is, you'll have to hurry. If they move the child to a new place, it will be hard to find him. Well, thank you. If it's not a joke, of course, said Vyacheslav Dmitrievich, already somewhat confused. The fact that the caller did not ask for money inspired some confidence in his words. Well, who is joking like that? I understand you need to find your only grandson. I am, you might say, a volunteer, a private person, a gratuitous do-gooder. Already hanging up the phone, Alex Johnson rubbed his hands together. He probably should have gotten at least some money from that old man. But no. And it was my intuition that didn't fail me. It's not worth getting involved. Now we can forget about this case with peace of mind. He was sure he'd done the right thing. He probably did. Only Danny's meeting with his grandparents brought something strange to those around him. Vyacheslav Dmitrievich arrived at Nikolai's house with his wife and a security guard. He expected that he would get into some brothel, where anything can happen. But the door was opened to him by a nice, fragile girl. When she heard why he was here, she nodded in agreement. Yes, I have Danny, but I didn't kidnap him. He left his foster father's family and doesn't want to go back. I don't think he will. His grandmother is here, and Nicholas and I are ready to adopt him. She took them to a small, cozy and tidy house. She introduced them to Danny. The grandmother's own grandmother ran crying to the boy. She looked just like Julia, she exclaimed. Look, Vyacheslav, Danny, my boy, and I am your grandmother. She hugged the child, but Danny pulled away and said politely, My grandmother is here. Here she is, Grandma Barbara Paulana. Vyacheslav Dmitrievich, looking around the furnishings of the house of two invalids, a man and a grandmother, not at all like the kidnapper, said, I seem to have been misled not about the boy's parentage, but about how he came to you and in what conditions he is kept. Jessica invited the guests to sit down at the table, and everyone told their part of the story. What can I say? Friends, thank you for not leaving our Danny in trouble, for giving him a chance to live normally, said Vyacheslav. The fact that he is our grandson is clear without DNA, although we need to analyze it. The other question is, what should we do next? I can't leave the boy here, but to tear him away from you would be cruel. No, we'll take him, we'll take the boy, cried the grandmother, clinging to her grandson. Wait with tears, stopped her Vyacheslav. I propose this, get together. All together we will move to us. We have a large house empty. There I'll take care of medical care for Nicholas and Barbara Paulina, and then we'll see how things go from there. And then everything changed in their lives with incredible speed. Vyacheslav Dmitrievich found doctors and paid for Nikolai's treatment. After rehabilitation, he was able to lead a full life. Having recovered, he married Jessica and engaged in the restoration of his business. Barbara Paulina, whose health also significantly improved, stayed to live with Danny's relatives. The boy never wanted to part with her. She longed for her former life, for her home in the village, but it was no longer there. Danny also did not forget the happy time spent with his grandmother in the village. Vyacheslav Dmitrievich had to take care of it. He built a new house in the village, which was to become a summer cottage for everyone, and for the boy's relatives, and for Barbara Paulina, and of course, for Nikolai and Jessica. And as for Alex Johnson, everything turned out much sadder for him, but not because of the people he tried so hard to ruin his life. Danny's family had long since forgotten about him, cut him out of their memories, out of their lives. Happy people don't need revenge. He screwed up his life on his own, almost unaided. Realizing that his actions made everything the other way around, adjusted the fate of his enemies. He decided to give up and do his own thing. Finally proposed to Jennifer, prepared for the wedding, but did not intend to part with old habits. He had another mistress, also Jennifer. The deceived woman was that soon she would become a legal spouse. Jennifer found out about the adventures of her fiancé and demanded that he stop this relationship. Alex Johnson didn't even think of denying it, of calming his beloved. Aren't you a little early to start disposing and attacking the future lawful wife? Not allowing me anything? What are you? If you don't like it, there's the door, there's the threshold, go away. You think I want to marry you so badly. If you leave, I'll marry someone else. Her name's Jennifer, too, by the way. Well, that's very convenient. Jennifer started to scandalize, but quickly realized that so she will only achieve the final breakup. That didn't scare her anymore, though. She realized what kind of life awaited her with this man, and it didn't suit her in any way. But she spent enough time with him to learn something about the machinations of the one she used to call her common-law husband, and she was not going to keep this information secret. She simply turned to the appropriate authorities who dealt with them. Before that, of course, she took out of the house that seemed most valuable. Alex Johnson went to trial, and Jennifer, to look for another husband, more reliable. The arrested man found himself without any support. He tried to turn to one mistress and another, but they quickly explained that they need a man not to carry packages to him. So Alex Johnson was in for a long and unhappy time in a place not so remote.